A magnificent wedding ceremony unfolds in a grand, sunlit cathedral. The union is sealed with the officiant's pronouncement, husband and wife. The blonde-haired bride and groom gaze lovingly at one another. Woo! Ding, ding! A celebratory bell rings out amidst cheers and blessings. Huzzah! The joyous crowd applauds the departing newlyweds. The happy couple is introduced. Mr. Edward Morton and Miss Elizabeth Dear. A woman whispers that she knew Mr. Morton as a frosty grouch before he met his bride. Another woman marvels at how his gaze now melts with affection, completely transformed. One lady asks her friend how such an unlikely pair came together, eager for the story. A woman points to another guest, revealing she is responsible for the match. She's a legendary matchmaker, credited with half the happy marriages in town. The famed matchmaker, a woman with light brown hair, turns and smiles warmly. Outside the church, a voice calls out for a Miss Pendleton. Miss Pendleton discusses the lovely wedding with her blonde-haired friend, who leans in with a chuckle. Her friend confesses she was overcome with both joy and envy for the couple. She recalls the loving way the newlyweds looked at each other. Miss Pendleton listens with a knowing and empathetic smile. The memory of the bride's blissful happiness lingers. Miss Pendleton speculates that the newlyweds might honeymoon in Italy. A sudden snap of her fork punctuates the blonde-haired woman's sigh of longing for her own romance. Miss Pendleton gently redirects her friend, addressing her as Miss Hyde. A fork squishes into the cake as Miss Hyde's mood visibly darkens. Slump. She dramatically collapses onto the table, lamenting the passage of time. Miss Pendleton questions the need for marriage as her friend is identified, Miss Jane Hyde. Jane is introduced as an avid equestrian and literature lover from a good family. A flashback shows a bewildered Jane receiving a sudden marriage proposal. In the present, Jane buries her face in her hands, conflicted over the gentleman's offer. Crack. The memory shatters as she vows not to tolerate his hidden affections. Sob. Jane cries over their betrayed friendship, while Miss Pendleton notes her friend's dramatic flair. Her suitor is revealed to be Mr. William Fairfax, a wealthy and well-regarded gentleman. A portrait of the dashing Mr. Fairfax accompanies praise for his character and looks. Jane laments that any other debutante would be overjoyed by his proposal. She confesses to Miss Pendleton her feeling of being unprepared for marriage. Miss Pendleton wonders if rejecting his proposal would leave Mr. Fairfax heartbroken. Stunned, Miss Pendleton confirms Jane's intent to reject him. Jane sighs, feeling like a fool. Jane despairs that her family is already planning the wedding without her consent. She confides in Miss Pendleton, torn between duty and her own desires. As Jane expresses her frustration, Miss Pendleton takes her hand in a comforting clasp. Holding her hand, Miss Pendleton acknowledges the difficulties an unmarried woman faces. She advises Jane to ignore worldly concerns and listen to her own heart. Contemplating her future, Jane freezes in sudden, stark realization. A man's approaching step is heard, and he greets the two ladies. Mr. Fairfax himself appears before them, with a dazzling smile, startling them both. A flustered Jane stammers his name as he apologizes for the intrusion. Mr. Fairfax's expression softens with concern as he looks at Jane. He asks if she's unwell. She nervously blames indigestion and rejects his offer of a carriage. Relieved by her explanation, Mr. Fairfax keeps his offer of assistance open. Miss Pendleton privately notes that his presence is the cause of Jane's distress and clears her throat. Mr. Fairfax turns his attention to Miss Pendleton, offering her a charming compliment. He invites Miss Pendleton to visit his sister Janet, who is eager to discuss a novel with her. Miss Pendleton graciously accepts the invitation, then pivots, asking Mr. Fairfax for another favor. He agrees, and she brings up a young man on their in-laws' side of the family. Miss Pendleton thoughtfully recalls the man, noting his reputation as a renowned gentleman. Mr. Fairfax confirms her memory is correct. The man is Mr. Ian Dalton of Whitefield. He reveals that Mr. Dalton is, in fact, a childhood friend from his days at Eton. Mr. Fairfax explains that he received a letter announcing his friend's visit, followed by a surprising second correspondence. The scene flashes back to him receiving the second letter at his desk. With a knowing smile, Mr. Fairfax explains this is the crux of the matter. Miss Pendleton listens with rapt attention. The scene shifts to a grand, sprawling manor under a bright blue sky. Inside, a dark-haired man sits by a sunlit window, reading a letter. He scoffs at the thought of being cast into the frivolities of London society. Mr. Dalton smirks, wondering what he could possibly gain from such an endeavor. Clop. The clip-clop of hooves sounds as a carriage travels down a London street at sunset. Inside the carriage, Miss Pendleton reflects on the name, Mr. Ian Dalton. A profile of Ian Dalton of Whitefield details his accomplishments as a wealthy heir and savvy financier. Clip, clop. She realizes her role in this. She is to befriend him as his chaperone. In a flashback, Miss Pendleton clarifies her task is to find a match for Mr. Dalton, which Mr. Fairfax admits is a crusade started by his sister-in-law. He acknowledges that Miss Pendleton may have her concerns about the plan. He assures her he would never force her to introduce her friends to a man who isn't interested in marriage. Her eyes widen in surprise at his words. Glip glop. Back in her carriage, Miss Pendleton reflects on her decision to accept, hoping it was the right one. In another memory, an elated Mr. Fairfax thanks her profusely for agreeing, while she privately concludes Mr. Dalton must be a fine gentleman. Clop. Looking out the carriage window, she thinks to herself, for now. A bead of sweat traces down her cheek as worry clouds her expression. Her thoughts turn to the apprehensions voiced by a worried-looking Miss Hyde. The stately Pendleton townhouse comes into view. Arriving home, Miss Pendleton is welcomed by her staff, who ask about the wedding. She replies it was lovely and asks after her grandmother, learning she's in good spirits. A maid presents a tray, but Miss Pendleton decides to take it up herself. She walks through a hallway, carrying the tray for her grandmother. A soft step is heard as she approaches the door, knocking twice and calling out, "Grandmother." She asks if her grandmother is awake as the older woman turns her head from her bed. Confirming it's her, Miss Pendleton enters the room. Clack. The door opens to reveal her smiling as she enters with the tray. Her grandmother smiles warmly, eager to hear every detail of the wedding. The grandmother laughs heartily upon hearing a story from the ceremony. The grandmother laments missing the sight of the stoic Edward shedding a tear, teasing that he'll never live it down as Miss Pendleton playfully calls her wicked. Her grandmother remarks that it was obvious the couple cared for each other, even if they suffered in silence. She then gives all the credit for the match to her dear granddaughter, who blushes at the praise. With a laugh, the grandmother continues to compliment her matchmaking skills, making Miss Pendleton shyly protest. The grandmother's smile turns thoughtful as she quietly observes her. Her tone turning serious, the grandmother addresses her as Laura and says she has something to ask. She gently holds Laura's chin, insisting on a truthful answer. The grandmother praises Laura's grace, but questions why she only uses her gifts for others. She asks why Laura doesn't seek her own chance at love, leaving her granddaughter momentarily speechless. A gentle hand cups Laura's cheek. Laura avoids the question, quietly taking her grandmother's hand and insisting it's late and she should rest. Kiss. She leans down to give her grandmother a gentle kiss on the forehead. Brush. A hand touches a book on a shelf as a quiet prayer begins. With hands clasped in prayer, she asks for blessings on the newlyweds, guidance for Miss Hyde and Mr. Fairfax, and peace for her grandmother. Her eyes are closed in deep and solemn prayer. Kneeling by her bed, she concludes her prayer by wishing for forgiveness for the man who left her 12 years ago. A letter arrives for Laura, its sender getting straight to the point. Clunk. In a carriage, a woman with light brown hair looks out the window with a concerned expression. The letter explains that Jane's answer to the proposal was a resounding no. Her rejection caused their mother to faint, and Jane has since confined herself to her room. Creak. The letter urgently requests a visit, stating that Jane needs her now more than ever. The letter is signed by a faithful friend as Miss Pendleton approaches the front door. Step. Upon entering the house, a voice calls out, "Over here, Laurie." Laurie is greeted warmly by her blonde-haired friend Rosie, who thanks her for coming so quickly. Laurie, now identified as Laura, asks after Mrs. Hyde, but Rosie, revealed to be Jane's elder sister Rosemary, hesitates. Shatter. A woman's furious voice shrieks from upstairs, declaring she will not suffer the sight of that dreadful spinster. The woman, presumably Mrs. Hyde, rages that the matchmaker has ruined Jane's prospects and forbids her from entering her chamber. Accusing Laura of meddling, Mrs. Hyde's tirade continues while Rosemary suggests it might be best to leave. Rosemary stands at the bottom of the stairs, apologizing profusely for her mother's dreadful words. Smile. Laura graciously tells her to think nothing of it. Step. As she turns to leave, her thoughts reveal she is lying. The words do sting. She reflects on turning her back on marriage at 25, forcing herself to become resilient. An unsold spinster, spoiled for the marriage market. Knock, knock. A gloved hand knocks on a door as someone calls for Miss Hyde. Laura Pendleton announces herself, asking if Jane is awake and will come to the door. A weary Jane Hyde peeks out, her face tired as she recognizes Miss Pendleton. Laura smiles, noting how pale Jane looks and explaining she came to check on her health after hearing of her poor appetite. Entering the room, Laura encourages Jane to eat, reminding her not to let low spirits affect her physical well-being. Clack. Jane sits silently, her expression full of sorrow. Laura turns back to face her friend. Miss Pendleton assures Jane there's no need to feel guilty, as Mr. Fairfax seems to have recovered from the heartbreak quite quickly, even going on a hunt. Mutter. Jane quietly utters Miss Pendleton's name, still lost in her thoughts. Miss Pendleton stands before the seated and dejected Jane, ready to talk. Jane asks if Miss Pendleton has another prospect in mind, questioning if it's because her inheritance will allow her leisure. Miss Pendleton clarifies she has no inheritance, as that was the condition for taking the Pendleton name, shocking Jane, who realizes she also won't receive her own. Jane reveals her family's fortune has been waning since her father's death, and they may lose their home. Sob. Crying on her bed, Jane calls herself a fool for throwing away her only prospect, when her mother was right to worry. Wish! Jane leaps up in despair, crying out to Miss Pendleton that she sees no way out, having never had proper schooling. She bemoans being as feather-brained at 25 as she was as a child, wondering what other path could possibly exist for her. Miss Pendleton's expression is serious, reflecting on the weight of being 25, a narrowing milestone for women of her time. For an unwed woman without an inheritance, the greatest fear is utter destitution. The narration describes the terror of a rapid descent into poverty and bitter isolation, an agony most never know. The world turns upside down, a weight only felt by the one who must suffer it. Squeeze. Miss Pendleton embraces Jane, telling her that she too was once naive at that age. Brush. She gently wipes away Jane's tear, asking if she would believe she has the power to shape her own life. Jane looks bewildered, imagining suitable professions for spinsters might be fortune-telling or street vending. Miss Pendleton smiles knowingly, tapping her lip and teasing that Jane might be onto something, unless, of course. Jane looks up with wide, curious eyes, waiting for her to continue. An image of a typewriter appears as Miss Pendleton explains she found herself better suited to be a governess. She offers her own typewriter to Jane, saying it's only gathering dust in the attic and could be put to good use. Miss Pendleton lays out a plan. With a few hours of practice each evening, Jane could be employed as a clerk within 3 months. She offers a small biscuit to Jane, who sits listening intently. Jane's expression shifts to one of dawning hope and astonishment. Reach. A gloved hand offers a small, round biscuit. Laura and Jane share a quiet moment of camaraderie, kneeling together. A month later at Fairfax Manor, a thought bubble expresses surprise at how quickly time has passed. Mr. Fairfax arrives home, greeting his staff with a warm and cheerful wave. Turn. He asks his companion how it feels to return to London, receiving a decidedly unenthusiastic reply. The dark-haired Mr. Dalton adjusts his cravat, finding the city's bustle more unbearable than ever. Mr. Dalton chides his friend for subjecting him to urban hell, but Mr. Fairfax reminds him of London's high society. Mr. Fairfax smiles, encouraging his cynical friend to live a little now that he's here. Grab. Mr. Dalton picks up a mountain of invitations, which Mr. Fairfax credits to his sister, Janet. Sigh. Dalton confirms he intends to turn down every single invitation, surprising his friend. He dismisses all socialites as vapid dilettantes, prompting Mr. Fairfax to call him a cynic. Mr. Fairfax insists he attend a ball for the Morton newlyweds, revealing he has enlisted a powerful ally. Brush. At another home, a maid named Anne begins styling Laura Pendleton's hair. Laura admits to herself that the evening's ball has made her a bit nervous. A famously reclusive gentleman's decision to attend this ball has inspired many others to RSVP. Anne remarks on the gentleman's impressive influence, while gently brushing Laura's hair. The maid asks if it's true Laura will meet the much-discussed Mr. Dalton, and she presumes she will. A thoughtful, mischievous expression crosses Anne's face as an idea forms. She gently touches Laura's shoulder, starting to make a suggestion. Lean. Anne suggests trying a different hairstyle for the evening, piquing Laura's curiosity. She hints that a new look might just catch the mysterious gentleman's eye. Ha ha, Laura laughs, calling the idea preposterous and referring to herself as a borderline spinster. She asks Anne for her usual style, noting that the carriage should be arriving soon. Brush. Final touches are made, as a delicate beaded hairnet is secured. Laura thanks Anne for her perfect handiwork, though Anne looks on thoughtfully. Just as she's ready, Anne calls out to her, stopping her for a moment. Anne remarks that it's been nearly a decade since she started working for Laura. Laura turns, her expression calm, as she waits for her maid to continue. Anne praises Laura's unfailing kindness over the years, which has never changed, and she reckons never will. bustle. The scene shifts to a grand, glittering ballroom teeming with high society guests. Chatter. Laura observes the dizzying crowd, impressed by the Mortons' guest list. As she walks through the crowd, wondering if her friends have arrived, a familiar voice calls her name. Mr. Fairfax greets Miss Pendleton warmly, commenting on the boisterous start to the season. He confesses he's already lost track of his sister Janet, whom he was meant to be chaperoning. Laura observes that while he looks a bit gaunt, his spirits are good, and he seems to be recovering well. She boldly asks Mr. Fairfax if Mr. Dalton will be joining them this evening. Creak. As a carriage arrives outside, Mr. Fairfax confirms she means his friend, Ian. Clunk. He explains Ian is running late, but should be arriving any moment, as a figure appears in the grand entrance. Creak. The sound of the carriage again accompanies his confirmation that she means Ian. Speak of the devil, Mr. Fairfax exclaims, moving eagerly to greet Ian as he finally arrives. Ian dryly reminds him he made his lateness clear. Disappointed, the party is as dull as he suspected. Mr. Fairfax dismisses his sour mood, offering to introduce him to the lady acquaintance he'd mentioned. Ugh. Ian realizes with annoyance that this woman is the powerful ally his friend promised. He accuses Mr. Fairfax of playing Cupid, but his friend insists he is merely a conveyor of friendship. Ian cynically questions if his friend has simply mistaken a lady's refinement for actual intellect. He laments that while graceful ladies are common, he has yet to meet one with true strength of wit. Mr. Fairfax is comically horrified, asking if Ian has stooped to becoming a raging misogynist. Fairfax counters Ian's cynicism, suggesting ladies are not flummoxed, but simply weary of his conversational dead ends. Sigh. As they walk, Mr. Fairfax warns his friend to be on his best behavior for the introduction. He spots Laura across the room, smiling brightly and exclaiming, "Ah, there she is, in fact." Laura Pendleton glances over, her expression showing mild surprise. Glance. Mr. Fairfax begins the introduction, formally presenting Mr. Ian Dalton of Whitefield, his brother-in-law, and a good friend since youth. He continues the introduction, presenting Ian to the granddaughter of Countess Abigail Pendleton. Laura offers a warm, polite smile in acknowledgement. She muses to herself that Mr. Dalton seems to have little interest in London, beyond meeting his friends. Laura remarks that finding a match for a man who holds love in such low regard would be difficult, prompting a startled Mr. Fairfax to correct her, insisting Ian does not hold love itself in low regard. As a silhouette of a couple appears, Mr. Fairfax explains he knows few men who have given more serious thought to the subject of love. Laura asks why, then, he is so resistant to courtship, but Mr. Fairfax simply says, "Who could say for certain?" Miss Pendleton and Mr. Dalton exchange formal greetings with a curtsy and a bow. Mr. Dalton maintains a serious, unreadable expression as he regards her. Laura smiles, predicting that many young debutantes will soon be dreaming of a romance with him. Mr. Dalton asks what exactly the Fairfax siblings told her about him. Laura relays their description of him as a kindly uncle and dutiful brother, but he scoffs, saying only his family could truly confirm that. He adds that his sister's opinion of him has likely dropped recently, and Laura wonders aloud why that might be. Nod, nod. As Mr. Fairfax agrees, Mr. Dalton suggests she can imagine the effort his sister expended to drag him to the ball. He continues, suggesting she might have granted her sister's wish with less argument, considering she recently gave birth. Laura internally observes that he's unlike other gentlemen, possessing a unique air of nobility and fastidiousness. Mr. Fairfax comments on Ian's dour demeanor, but the narration notes that his airs can't hide his eccentricities. Laura points out that, despite his complaints, he chose to attend, proving that a promise means something to him. Nod. Ian acknowledges Mr. Fairfax's jibe that his sister has spies in London, namely Mr. Fairfax himself, to ensure he keeps his word. Laura observes that he seems unaccustomed to compliments, prompting him to ask what makes her say that. She suggests he prefers to play the villain rather than let his virtues shine, and he readily agrees that he is one. He claims no one has ever spoken a favorable word about him, which makes Laura chuckle, musing that her own eyes must be deceiving her. She counters that she sees a man who feigns faults to remain humble, but he insists he only lets the truth speak for itself. She cleverly points out how he deferred to the opinions of his nieces and nephews rather than praise himself as an uncle. Furthermore, she wagers that few men would show such consideration for their sister's postpartum health, leaving him momentarily speechless. Beam. Laura concludes with a bright smile that he is the finest younger brother a lady could wish for. Bravo! Mr. Fairfax inwardly celebrates Miss Pendleton's flawless victory, delighted that the tables have been turned on his friend. Ian admits to himself that she certainly got the better of him. He reflects that he had intended to ruin the conversation as usual, but has finally met his match. As she begins to depart, he calls out, "Miss Pendleton," stopping her. Referencing Mr. Fairfax's introduction, he asks what manner of friendship she intends to share with him. Laura smiles warmly and turns the question back on him, asking what kind he would like. She outlines her terms: time for conversation, introductions to dear friends, and company through correspondence. In exchange for the benefits of her friendship, she asks only for his unwavering honesty in return. Taking a step closer, he remarks that she seems as unaccustomed to praise as he is. He declares that a friendship with her may be the greatest prize one could ever aspire to. Laura blushes at his compliment, calling him far too kind. Ian looks down at her, his expression shifting from serious to something softer. Smile. A small, genuine smile graces his lips. Reach. On his gentleman's honor, he reaches for her hand. With an open palm, he pledges to her the full extent of his unwavering honesty. Their hands draw closer as they prepare to seal their pact. He gently kisses her hand, hoping their friendship will be a fruitful one. Smiling brightly, Laura replies that she will pray for the same. To celebrate their newfound friendship, she begins to make a suggestion. Bustle. She offers to introduce him to her lady friends, suggesting he ask one to dance as the music ends. Doon. He confesses with comical gravity that he literally cannot dance, having never been properly taught. The news creates a dilemma for Laura, while Mr. Fairfax teasingly asks if he slept through his dance classes. Ian dismisses the impractical folly of dancing, though the narration points out that neglecting to ask a lady to dance after being introduced could cause offense. An idea suddenly strikes Laura. She asks Mr. Fairfax about Dalton's athletic prowess, and he confirms he's a natural. Grab. Suddenly, Laura takes hold of Mr. Dalton's arm. Laura beams, ready to lead the way. Step. As they walk, he begins to protest that her offer might be a joke, but he assures her he is a horrid dancer who will surely stomp on her feet. Clasp. She confidently replies that her feet are sturdier than they look. As he tries to protest further, she urges him on, saying the music is about to start. Step. She advises him to focus and not let idle thoughts distract him. She instructs him to watch her, not his feet, and gently follow her lead. The orchestra begins to play a new piece. He takes her hand as they begin their dance. They take their place on the grand ballroom floor. She inwardly notes that he is indeed a natural athlete, his steps quickly falling in sync with hers. He remains stiff, concentrating intently on their movements. Twirl. He suggests they trust his feet are as chivalrous as his words, then asks to raise her chin. They move closer, gazing at each other as they dance. His expression is focused and gentle as he looks down at her. She looks up at him with a bright, confident smile. She remarks on his sudden improvement, praising his talent, and wondering aloud why he ever refused dance lessons. He smiles, admitting the reason is no great mystery. He explains he had better things to do than dance with sweaty boys, while a stunned Mr. Fairfax wonders when Ian became so comfortable dancing. He admits, however, that his lack of training turned him into a stick in the mud who wouldn't dare approach a lady to dance. As other couples twirl by, Laura insists he is doing himself a disservice. He insists his assessment is not baseless, listing his lack of conversational and dancing skills as ungentlemanly. But Laura simply smiles and says they'll have to agree to disagree. Laura posits that honoring a lady's wish to dance is the height of chivalry, but he counters that it would leave one of her named virtues unfulfilled. Respect, as he has little for the norms of high society. But she laughs, admitting she wouldn't fault him for that. The camera pans over to a group of ladies gossiping on a divan. Laura continues, explaining that even society ladies find joy in their lives despite the difficult circumstances. She finishes by saying she will pray that a fortunate lady will one day share that joy with him. They hold their final pose, gazing into each other's eyes. He questions her earnest belief in abstract concepts like fate and soulmates. He asks what meaning such concepts could possibly hold, and she simply replies that she believes in them nonetheless. He calls her a hopeless romantic, and she retorts that she's heard he's not so different, making him wonder what William has been saying. A metaphorical scene shows him in a library, as if turning away from such notions. Clap. The music ends, and the surrounding guests applaud. As she walks away, he reflects on the peculiar sensation of their dance. She muses that despite having only just met, she already feels an odd sense of a kindred spirit with him. She concludes he is a rare and consummate gentleman who truly listens to a lady's words. Smile. She happily decides he would be a fine acquaintance to introduce to her friends. Jolly good, I say, Mr. Fairfax cheers, calling her an exceptional tutor. Chatter. Bustle. As they return, Mr. Fairfax remarks that Ian is as fit as he'll ever be. Glance. She spots her friends and announces it's the opportune moment for introductions. Rush. Mr. Fairfax cheerfully tells her to take her time. Sigh. Mr. Fairfax remarks that the dance was far from a disaster and questions why Ian refused lessons all these years. Mr. Fairfax adds that he could have spared Miss Pendleton the effort, as she introduces a smiling Mr. Dalton to her friends. Mr. Dalton listens in thoughtful silence. Ha 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 laughter fills the grand ballroom as the ladies enjoy his company. Bustle. Laura smiles, relieved that the introductions are going well. The narrator observes that Mr. Dalton seems engrossed in conversation, his disposition having softened. The focus shifts to the radiant Miss Dora Lance, identified as the sole child of Baronet Lance. Mr. Dalton and Miss Lance stand together, sharing a pleasant moment. Laura watches them from a distance, thinking they make a fine pairing. Whisper. Bustle. Laura discreetly informs a surprised Mr. Fairfax that she will be taking her leave. Declaring her work done, she politely declines his offer to call for a carriage, stating one is already waiting. Outside, she invites Mr. Fairfax and Mr. Dalton to tea sometime, which he happily accepts on their behalf. She stands beside her carriage, looking back toward the manor. Smile. Laura wonders if Mr. Dalton asked Miss Lance to dance, concluding he surely must have. She reflects that no gentleman could possibly refuse such a comely and interested debutante. Step. Now inside her carriage, Laura notes what an immaculate pair they make. Chuckle. She muses that they might one day become the most splendid married couple in all of London. Clunk! Suddenly, a gloved hand slams against her carriage door as someone urgently calls her name. Huff! A startled Laura looks out, stammering in shock. Huff. A close-up reveals Mr. Dalton's face, flushed and out of breath. Huff. Mr. Dalton stands before her, clearly having run to catch her. Laura exclaims that he must have sprinted all this way to reach her. Huff, holding the door, he catches his breath as she asks what could be so urgent. Laura wonders why he isn't dancing with other ladies, but he interjects, saying she wounds him for disappearing without a word. Huff. He asks breathlessly if she truly meant to make him a churl who wouldn't even say goodbye to his first dance partner. Bye, bump. Her heart skips a beat at his earnest words. Haha! Laura laughs, apologizing if her sudden departure perplexed him. She explains she simply assumed they would meet again soon, making a formal goodbye unnecessary, which seems to surprise him. She mentions that the Pendleton townhouse often hosts afternoon tea and modest music recitals. Continuing, she says these are informal gatherings and that she had planned to invite him and Mr. Fairfax. As he listens, she hastily adds that she wouldn't want to impose on his precious time. He asks if she is the host of these gatherings, and she clarifies they are held in her grandmother's name. A gentle image depicts her elderly grandmother sitting peacefully in a wheelchair. He understands, remarking on how considerate she is. Mr. Dalton accepts her invitation, and Laura happily promises to organize the next gathering with all haste. He playfully suggests tomorrow, but she protests that's far too soon. She explains the doctor is visiting tomorrow and proposes the day after, which he readily agrees to. Smiling warmly, Laura says she will await the day eagerly. Kiss. He lifts her hand to his lips, replying that he feels the same. Slip. His fingers gently slide from hers as they part ways. He warmly wishes Miss Pendleton a safe journey home. Clip, clop. The carriage begins to pull away into the night. Clip, clop, stare. Inside, Laura reflects on her surprising new friend, whose kindness and courtesy far exceeded her expectations. Clop. She smiles, hoping their friendship will prove to be a cordial one. Clop. Mr. Dalton stands outside the manor, watching her carriage disappear down the road. Clop. He remains standing alone after she is gone. Fidget. His hand clenches slightly at his side. The news of the mysterious Ian Dalton's arrival in the London social scene spreads like wildfire. After the ball, Mr. Dalton became the most sought-after guest among all the hosts of the ton. However, one person acted quickly, as an unseen woman urges Dora Dear to speak up at the Lance Manor. Lady Lance, Dora's mother, eagerly asks for all the details about the previous night's ball. Dora gushes to her mother that Mr. Dalton was far more dashing than rumored, and has even agreed to join them for dinner. Tee-hee. Dora proudly recounts securing the only invitation Mr. Dalton accepted, impressing her mother with the memory. Flick. As a maid serves tea, Lady Lance remarks what a perfect gentleman he will be to grace their table. An elegant teapot is shown as the narrator explains that dinners at Lance Manor were one of London's most envied honors. The narrative explains a lavish dinner was, on the surface, a tasting opportunity. It was also a chance to meet the charming host's daughter, Miss Dora Lance. A portrait shows a proud, mustachioed man, a figure of notoriety. A blonde woman notes that Mr. Dalton's Whitefield estate is immensely lucrative. She recounts how he boldly claimed his family fortune, investing in everything. Concluding he's impressive, the mother hears her daughter note her detailed knowledge. Pout. Miss Lance says her mother can praise his wealth all she wants, but she refuses to marry for anything less than a tug on her heartstrings, frustrating her mother. Pout. She worries a man of his means could find a more prestigious match. Sniffle. Her mother consoles her, telling her to use the smile that ensnared him, but Dora insists he was just polite. Stare. Her mother insists he was lost in her eyes, a complete misunderstanding. Miss Lance questions why he spurned her for the final waltz, leaving abruptly after bidding Miss Pendleton goodnight. Stiff. Her mother dismisses his dance with Miss Pendleton as a sign of his nerves with a more experienced woman, but Dora objects to the insult. Her mother insists Mr. Dalton had a desirous look, leaving Miss Lance to wonder. She reflects that, boastfully, her looks have never earned anyone's dislike. Surrounded by flowers, she appears confident in her own beauty. She daydreams of Mr. Dalton, ardently confessing his love for her, Miss Lance. The scene reveals Dora Lance, a starry-eyed 20-year-old girl at heart. While she daydreams, others watch Mr. Dalton's activities as a storm brews. Swa. A woman in a yellow dress hurries up the stairs. Mr. Dalton arrives, adjusting his hat as Miss Pendleton watches him. From the stairs, Miss Pendleton cheerfully welcomes Mr. Dalton. Glance. He looks up at her with a warm smile, offering his greetings. They face each other formally on the staircase landing. As rain pours outside, she admits she worried the storm would keep him away. Through the rain-streaked doors, he notes the ride was harder for his coachman. She informs him that the foul weather means he'll be her only company. Smile. He declares it an honor to have a monopoly on her time. Crackle. Pop. She invites him to sit by the fire where tea awaits. As they settle in the parlor, the narration explains his reputation as a rare and anticipated guest. Trickle. Tea is poured as the narration reveals that society's matchmaking speculations were wrong. Miss Pendleton privately acknowledges that he is unaware of her role as a matchmaker. Sip. She observes that he seems completely disinterested in finding a bride. She wonders what other interests might be occupying his mind. She recalls her efforts to help him mingle by hosting parties and introducing him to friends. Her fingers gracefully play across the piano keys. She remembers how he would always gravitate toward her piano to listen. He seemed to prefer amicable company over any sort of romantic pursuit. Sip. She concludes she's fine with their friendship, despite disappointing Mr. Fairfax. Clack. She puts her cup down and asks how he is finding London. Lean. He leans in, thanking her for all the pleasant experiences she's provided. She recalls how he often told her stories of his hometown, Whitefield. He spoke so tenderly of Whitefield Hall that she felt transported there. She vividly imagined herself at his estate, admiring the views he described. In the present, she listens intently as he fondly reminisces. He speaks with a gentle smile, lost in memories of his home. She chuckles, remarking that his love for his hometown is admirable. She tells him his affection is a credit to him. Unlike other gentry, the more she hears, the more she believes it's a marvelous place, and he agrees his words can't do it justice. Scan. He suggests it would be better to show her in person. Mr. Dalton offers Laura a small painting of his estate as a token of his esteem. Thrilled, she exclaims what a lovely gift it would be. Laura asks if he has a painter in his employ, and he cryptically replies that his own fingertips are. Surprised, she asks if he is a painter himself, but he humbly claims he only studied a little as a child. She inwardly finds this peculiar, as painting is typically considered a pastime for girls, not boys. Mr. Dalton regrets not bringing his sketchbook to show her drawings of his home Whitefield and his family. A vision of his sister appears as Laura expresses her eagerness to learn about the children. He explains his eldest nephew is already a young man, born before he himself was 8. Showing a painting of Cambridge, he says his nephew studies there as he once did, lamenting how much the boy has changed. He then speaks of his second eldest, a girl named Olivia Fairfax. A portrait reveals his 2 younger nephews, 10-year-old Daniel and 8-year-old George. He complains that the 2 rapscallions would sooner fight than behave, but Laura finds it sweet and normal for their age. Loom. He insists they cross the line and deplores that he is their only source of discipline. Laura asks about his youngest nephew, born a year ago, assuming he must be a little cherub. HMPH. He remarks that after the difficult birth, Being cherubic is the least the boy can do, prompting Laura to ask about his sister's health. Sigh. He assures her his sister is recovering, but hopes the youngest will be her last child. Smile. Laura listens with a warm and gentle smile. She offers to send a small picture book as a gift for his youngest nephew. Jolt. When she asks for the nephew's name, Mr. Dalton is visibly startled. Flustered, he covers his mouth, unable to answer immediately. Ugh. Laura giggles at his bashfulness, and he admits it before she vows to find a fitting gift for baby Ian. He clears his throat, still blushing from the exchange. Laura reflects that yet another layer of Mr. Dalton's enigmatic character has been revealed. A passage in a book describes his character as unwavering in his affections, and possessing a loving heart reserved for a select few. An illustration shows him walking with a blonde woman and 2 young boys. Clack. As her maid Anne serves refreshments, Laura wonders why London's ladies are so hesitant toward him. She resolves to pray that he finds a worthy wife when he finally seeks love for himself. St. Anne, the maid, watches from a doorway with a thoughtful expression. She seems to be contemplating something. Chirp. A few days later, the scene shifts to a bright day at the estate. Anne announces herself at Miss Laura's door. Clack. Laura invites her to come in. Entering the room, Anne gasps. My goodness! Laura stands ready in a beautiful teal and white dress. She asks Anne to help fasten her dress. While helping, Anne apologizes for not coming sooner, but Laura explains she hadn't planned to go out. She reveals that Mr. Dalton arrived unexpectedly and invited her for a walk. Anne confirms it's the gentleman from Yorkshire, and Laura says he is waiting in the drawing room. The maid notes he has become a regular guest, and Laura explains her home is a peaceful haven for him. Anne picks up a bonnet adorned with pink flowers. She steps forward, suggesting Laura wear it for her stroll. Laura protests that the bonnet is too lavish, but Anne insists it will accentuate her neckline. Rustle. Tying a different bonnet on Laura, Anne suggests there must be another reason he visits so often. She adjusts the bonnet and asks Laura what she thinks that reason might be. Anne cheekily proposes his first reason is to steal their chef, whose cooking is praised by all. Holding up 2 fingers, Anne prepares to reveal the second and most likely reason. Done. She points at Laura, declaring he's fallen for someone whose company he can only find there. It's you, Miss Anne exclaims, leaving Laura dazed and speechless. Slip. Laura laughs, assuming Anne is joking, but her maid insists she is serious and that Mr. Dalton will soon be smitten, leaving Laura to question why that would ever be the case. Clack. Laura explains that Mr. Dalton's glances have never shown any amorous sentiment. Step. Walking indoors, she muses he showed more passion for the dinner dishes. Her maid listens as Laura laughs about the situation while ascending the stairs. A maid apologizes for the delay, as Mr. Dalton waits, inwardly noting that Laura fails to see how he truly looks at her. The maid observes the undeniable warmth in his gaze, wondering how Laura could possibly miss it. The maid concludes that silly Miss Laura is a novice when it comes to her own heart. Chirp, chirp. Outside, Laura and Mr. Dalton walk together, remarking on the pleasant weather. At an outdoor table with another couple, Laura comments on what a handsome pair they make. Mr. Dalton agrees they seem heaven-sent, and Laura is pleased he had the same thought. He says they are of a like mind, adding he knew Mr. Morton as a rather austere gentleman. He explains that the lovely Mrs. Morton has softened her husband's disposition into that of a doting spouse. Flinch. His observation startles Laura, who nervously asks what he means. Smile. He simply smiles down at her puzzled expression. Ba-bump, ba-bump. Her heart thumps as he chuckles, revealing that Mr. Morton himself credited her for his marriage. As the Mortons are shown, Laura modestly replies that he gives her too much credit. He counters her modesty, quoting Mr. Morton's praise for her guidance in building loving futures. He continues, stating his belief that too many people suffer in ill-suited marriages. He laments that many willingly choose a lifetime of misery for wealth alone. Smile. In contrast, he says, her virtuous deeds shine brightly for the joy they bring. Blush. Flustered by his praise, she insists he is flattering her once again. Sweat. He inwardly notes that she always struggles to accept sincere praise. Flap. Flap. He thinks that while a gentleman would change the subject, he finds himself wanting to continue. He admits to himself that he enjoys seeing her flustered, which might make him no gentleman at all. Wince. She asks him to be more frugal with his compliments, prompting him to ask what would be dishonest about them. Fidget. Laura confesses her efforts were a conspiracy with Mr. Fairfax to marry him off to a friend. She explains that every invitation, and even the dance lesson, was part of her matchmaking scheme. Wince. She braces herself, thinking he has every right to be furious that she revealed their secret agreement. Smile. She glances up to find him looking at her with a gentle, knowing smile. Gasp. Shocked, she listens as he laughingly admits he knew all along and was the one deceiving her. She calls him roguish for laughing, and he playfully asks for forgiveness for his part in the deception. He explains he was simply impressed that her honesty prevailed in the end. Beam, he asks if she'll accept his apology, and a blushing Laura turns away as he promises not to deceive her again. Clip, clop. As a carriage waits, he gives Miss Pendleton his solemn word, clop. As they part ways, another lady spots a familiar gentleman from her carriage. Clunk. Whoosh. A blonde woman in pink happily greets Mr. Dalton as her carriage stops. Haha. Mr. Dalton laughs off Laura's apology, insisting he owes her his gratitude for her efforts. Slump. She hangs her head, feeling it was inappropriate to interfere in his affairs without his knowledge. He reassures her, clarifying that it's inaccurate to say he has no regard for marriage. He explains he was never particularly demanding or shallow in his search for a partner. He simply never felt inclined to give his heart to the ladies back home, a fact Laura finds unfortunate. She suggests he may be awaiting a fated love, though he finds the term fate a bit grandiose. A romantic silhouette depicts a couple in a tender, intimate embrace. He describes his ideal as a serendipitous encounter, an authentic connection that flourishes naturally. He concedes that this idea might align with her concept of fate, after all. Laura brightens, offering to help him find this fated lady, and he thoughtfully considers her proposal. Pause. He declines her kind offer, stopping in his tracks as she asks why. He calmly replies that it's not because he dislikes arranged meetings, leaving her puzzled. They stand facing each other on the sunlit street, a quiet moment passing between them. Zwa. He gazes at her with a soft smile as she looks back, surprised by his expression. Creak. The sound of a wheelchair is heard as an unseen person calls out for Miss Pendleton. Miss Lance enthusiastically greets them from her carriage, having stopped upon seeing them. She explains she couldn't resist stopping to bid them good day in such exquisite weather. Miss Lance stands before Laura and Mr. Dalton on the paved walkway. While Laura thinks Miss Lance seems to be glowing, she inwardly laments having to leave for a tedious errand. Miss Lance turns to Laura but addresses her question to Mr. Dalton. She asks if he plans to stay in London long, and he confirms he does. Delighted, she remarks on the upcoming social season and the itinerary she's already planned. She eagerly invites him on a picnic, suggesting boating and even wild swimming. After he vaguely agrees, she extends the invitation to a surprised Miss Pendleton. Squeal, giggle. At her urging, Mr. Dalton formally accepts, and Miss Lance celebrates their decision. Laura quietly reflects that Miss Lance's disposition seems unusually forward today. She muses on how novel it is to see the proud young lady actively engage a gentleman. Realizing the affection seems one-sided, Laura decides it is time for her to depart. Miss Lance cheerfully waves goodbye as she departs in her carriage. Clip, clop. Laura and Mr. Dalton watch her carriage ride away down the street. Mr. Dalton remarks on their good fortune, and Laura agrees, praising Miss Lance's many charms. Chuckle. She chuckles, agreeing with his observation that her favor is highly prized. Laura is inwardly relieved that his blasé attitude doesn't indicate any ill will toward Miss Lance. Step. As they resume their walk, he begins to speak about her acquaintances. He playfully jests that Mr. Fairfax is the only flaw in her impeccable social circle, while a distant Fairfax feels someone speaking ill of him. Stare. Intrigued by her defense of Fairfax, Mr. Dalton asks why she considers him a cherished friend. Walking up the steps, he asks if she's aware of Fairfax's recent situation with Miss Hyde. He jokingly recalls Miss Hyde jilting a deserving William, and Laura laughs nervously. Laura explains that Mr. Fairfax's spirits have fortunately improved since the rejected proposal. She recounts how he kindly offered Miss Hyde a letter of recommendation to preserve their friendship. Laura playfully chides him for judging Fairfax, noting she owes his friend for their meeting, which he concedes. She suggests they ask Miss Lance to invite Mr. Fairfax to the picnic, certain he'd enjoy boating. Shiver. Mr. Dalton agrees, joking that they can make Fairfax their oarsman. Arriving at her home, Laura invites him for tea, but he politely declines, citing an expected letter. As she prepares to say goodbye, he asks to trouble her with one last question. He asks if it would be unseemly to inquire if Mr. Fairfax has ever sought her affections. Standing before her gate, Laura is completely stunned by his direct question. She asks for clarification, her expression one of comical shock. Confounded, she points out her close friendship with Miss Hyde, and he confirms he is aware. Stammer. She stammers that such a notion is impossible and unseemly to even consider. Smile. He smiles gently, explaining that her flustered reaction told him everything he needed to know. Bow. He asks to take his leave, and a bewildered Laura agrees. Mr. Dalton tips his hat and walks away down the street. Dazed, Laura stands frozen at her gate, completely baffled by their final exchange. Rustle. The scene shifts to a quiet, sunlit study filled with books. Rustle. A hand gently adjusts a single pink rose. Rustle. As she arranges flowers, Laura wonders about the budding sentiment between Mr. Dalton and Miss Lance. She recalls their interaction, finding Mr. Dalton's indifference particularly peculiar. Pause. She considers he might be a guarded man, waiting for the right moment to reveal his heart. Holding a rose, she entertains another possibility, that Miss Lance has completely misunderstood him. She reflects that while Miss Lance is an exemplary debutante, she's also inexperienced and easily swayed by praise. Laura imagines that a few words of flattery may have planted the idea of a match. Shake, shake. The thought is troubling, and she shakes her head with a worried expression. Slice. Realizing Mr. Dalton might have met Miss Lance when he dismissed his need for a matchmaker, she gasps. A severed rosebud falls to the floor as she murmurs about her own clumsiness. Laura sighs, contemplating what seems to be a perfect match on paper. A portrait depicts the ideal union of Miss Lance's title and Mr. Dalton's wealth. She muses on their potential marriage, acknowledging it is only speculation for now. Feeling responsible for their introduction, she resolves to watch over their developing relationship. The scene shifts to the Pendleton townhouse a few days later. Shove! An unseen visitor arrives, calling for Miss Pendleton. Miss Hyde enters, apologizing for her tardiness, which she blames on traffic from a society event. Miss Hyde is surprised Laura missed a party, but Laura explains she chose to stay home with her grandmother. She worries about her grandmother's waning health, which keeps her close to home. Chuckle. She admits she often prefers a quiet afternoon with a friend to a boisterous party. Turning to the day's lesson, Laura challenges Miss Hyde to aim for a higher goal in her typing. Click, clack. As Miss Hyde types, Laura reflects on her student's admirable, trustworthy nature. Clack. Miss Hyde nervously focuses on her typing, recalling that it's been nearly 2 months since she began her lessons. A flashback shows Miss Hyde's initial awe upon first seeing Laura's study. Scan. In the past, she marveled at the sheer volume of books, calling it a library in a townhouse. Clunk. In the flashback, a sudden sound startles her, her eyes widening. She excitedly identifies the typewriter, which Laura confirms she will be using to learn how to formulate documents. When asked how she acquired it, Laura smiles and explains she bought the costly machine secondhand. Laura recounts her own past, when she felt aimless before discovering the typewriter and dedicating herself to practicing. Diligent training and an acquaintance's help allowed her to master typing and document design. The memory shows her past self, hard at work at her desk. Though she ultimately found clerical work wasn't for her, she harbors no regrets about the effort she invested. She tells Miss Hyde that she believes women share the same natural desire for knowledge as men. Glance. She takes Miss Hyde's hand, connecting her own journey to her passion for teaching her now. Laura encourages Miss Hyde to envision herself as a proficient typist in the future. Bob bump. Bob bump. Moved by Laura's sincere offer to teach her everything, Miss Hyde's heart pounds. A close-up shows determined fingers pressing down on the typewriter keys. The story returns to the present day in the book-lined study. Looking over several typed pages, Laura praises Miss Hyde's excellent progress. Laura exclaims that her work has surpassed all expectations, and Miss Hyde credits her teacher's strict instruction. Slump. Exhausted, Miss Hyde theatrically collapses, joking that the difficult task took her very soul. She flashes back to Laura as a surprisingly stern teacher, pointer in hand. Miss Hyde says the experience taught her not to judge a book by its cover, but Laura credits her student's own perseverance. Stare. As Laura begins writing, Miss Hyde watches her with intense curiosity. Lean. She leans closer, asking what Miss Pendleton is writing. Laura reveals she is doing translations for her Latin studies, much to Miss Hyde's surprise. Gasp! Spotting classical works in their original Greek and Latin, Miss Hyde learns Laura studied both at boarding school. Laura explains that while unusual, her particular boarding school offered classical languages in addition to modern ones. Miss Hyde is deeply impressed to hear that Laura can translate from both languages with the help of a dictionary. She jokes that she's thoroughly impressed, as it's quite literally all Greek to her. Chuckle. Laura humbly suggests her knowledge is sufficient to tutor Oxford scholars, even if she cannot attend as a student. Miss Hyde asks if she plans to become a governess, and Laura quietly confirms her intention. As Laura continues writing, Miss Hyde begins to understand. She realizes that all this time, Laura had been engrossed in her own studies to qualify as a governess. In her eyes, Laura is the most dignified of ladies. An image of Laura's tireless work ethic flashes by as an impressive feat. Miss Hyde insists that Laura is already more than qualified for such a position. She praises Laura's academic achievements, but Laura believes her accomplishments still aren't enough. Laura explains the harsh reality that girls' education is a luxury often cut during hard times, making employment precarious. A silhouette illustrates the role of a governess teaching children in a wealthy household. Laura explains that the work of a governess is unstable, requiring exceptional skills to command a higher wage. With a gentle hand on her book, she expresses hope that her hard work will pay off. She imagines her future, teaching at her former school until she can finally retire. Her ultimate dream is to purchase a small country cottage and live out her days in peace. Miss Hyde is astonished to hear how meticulously Laura has planned her entire life. Sigh. Feeling foolish for her own lack of foresight, Miss Hyde is reassured by Laura's faith in her potential. Laura smiles, remembering one last thing she needs to mention. Slip. She presents an invitation, announcing that Miss Lance's picnic is approaching. Laura asks if Miss Hyde will join them, and she confirms she also received an invitation. Puzzled about why she was invited, a flashback reveals Laura had suggested to a delighted Miss Lance that she invite both Miss Hyde and Mr. Fairfax. Laura persuades her friend to attend, reminding her that soon they won't have time for such leisure, and Miss Hyde agrees. Laura smiles, hoping the picnic could be the perfect opportunity for Mr. Fairfax and Miss Hyde to reconcile. With no true animosity between them, she believes the event can finally bridge their awkward rift. She envisions the two of them finally making amends. Clap. Setting her hopes aside, Laura encourages Miss Hyde to continue with their day's work. As the two women diligently pursued their studies, the days passed by quietly. Bustle. At last, the eagerly awaited day of Miss Lance's picnic arrives. Chatter. Dressed for the occasion, Laura and Miss Hyde join the other guests. Murmur. Across the lawn, Mr. Dalton and Mr. Fairfax observe the gathering. Swoosh. Miss Lance cheerfully calls for everyone's attention, directing the ladies and gentlemen to the carriages. Ahaha, she shares a light-hearted laugh with her friends. Mr. Fairfax suggests that Mr. Dalton should take the coachman's seat and escort one of the ladies. A confused Mr. Dalton asks who he'll be paired with and is told it will be Miss Pendleton. Wave. Mr. Fairfax smiles and wishes him an enjoyable ride, leaving a stoic Mr. Dalton behind. Meanwhile, Mr. Fairfax politely offers to escort Laura and Miss Hyde to his carriage. Haha. As he gallantly helps a lady with her step, Mr. Dalton watches from a distance. Mr. Fairfax gently takes Miss Hyde's hand to help her board the carriage. For a brief moment, their hands connect. Chatter. Miss Lance approaches Mr. Dalton, urging him to hurry so they can depart. Bustle. She expresses her worry that they will be the very last to arrive. He politely agrees, privately thinking it's a good opportunity to foster goodwill with Laura's friend. Step. He leads the way, announcing it is time for them to be on their way. The carriage ride begins under a bright, sunny sky. Their carriage, driven by Mr. Dalton, proceeds down the cobblestone path. Clop. Mr. Dalton focuses on the road ahead. Whisper. In the back, two ladies gossip that the rumors about his handsome features were an understatement. They agree that he and Miss Lance, seated gracefully behind him, make a picturesque couple. Tilt. One of the women leans forward, asking Mr. Dalton why he is so rarely seen at Lance Manor. He calmly explains that his urgent business affairs often conflict with Miss Lance's invitations. Clop. Shocked, a lady remarks that it's a pity to miss such a social honor, and he agrees. The women then question why he is a regular guest at the Pendleton house, wondering what could be entertaining there. One suggests perhaps Mr. Dalton simply has more sophisticated tastes than them. Another woman praises the delicious meals at the Pendletons, noting that Lady Pendleton is quite the gourmand. She then smirks, wondering why the grandmother spends lavishly on food but so little on Laura's marriage prospects. Clop. As another lady tries to quiet her, she retorts that all of London knows Laura has no dowry, and Mr. Dalton listens intently. The woman reflects that despite her beauty, Laura has never once received a proper marriage proposal. This, she concludes, is entirely due to the lack of financial incentive for any potential suitor. Flinch. She continues to press, questioning why the Pendletons denied Laura the right to inherit. Clop! Another lady leans in with a malicious smile, revealing that the answer lies with Laura's mother. With a tear in her eye, Miss Lance shouts for the gossiping woman, Victoria, to stop at once. Inside the carriage, 4 ladies sit quietly during their journey. Ba-bump. Ba-bump. Flustered by another lady's comment, Miss Lance insists she was only trying to explain the circumstances, her heart pounding. Creak! The carriage wheel slows to a stop on the grassy path. Mr. Dalton announces their arrival at the sunny picnic destination, inviting the ladies to disembark. Chatter. The guests begin to exit the carriages, assisted by the gentleman. Step. As a woman steps down, a cheerful voice welcomes everyone to the picnic. The man in the gray coat helps Miss Lance alight from the carriage. The guests gather together on the manicured lawn. An unseen host directs the guests to their pre-arranged picnic blankets. Glance. Miss Lance cheerfully suggests that anyone interested in boating should head toward the water. A woman notes that Mr. Dalton hasn't taken his eyes off Miss Pendleton, assuming he's still pondering their carriage conversation. Sigh. The woman expresses her disapproval of Victoria's insensitivity, just as Mr. Dalton approaches Miss Lance to request a moment of her time. Surprised, Miss Lance looks up as Mr. Dalton asks her for a private stroll. Swoop. Ba-bump. Her heart flutters at the thought of a promenade alone with Mr. Dalton. Ba-bump. Eek! As her friends squeal with excitement, a blushing Miss Lance panics over what to talk about. Jolt. Mr. Dalton startles Miss Lance by asking her to indulge his curiosity. He admits to overhearing the conversation about Laura's mother, leaving Miss Lance to think it was bound to happen. He continues walking, acknowledging that it is shameful to pry, but that he trusts she wouldn't betray a friend's confidence. He explains his concern stems from his own cherished new friendship with Miss Pendleton. Mr. Dalton states that to preserve their friendship, he must understand her past. Mutter. With a worried expression, Miss Lance begins to recount the story as she heard it. She describes Laura's mother as a celebrated beauty of high society who had countless suitors. Tragedy struck when the young woman vanished at 17, shortly after an American artist was hired to paint her portrait. The star-crossed lovers eloped, but their story ended when Laura's mother died in childbirth. The artist disappeared soon after, and it was presumed he abandoned his infant daughter to start a new life. This left Miss Laura to be taken in and formally acknowledged by the Pendleton family. A silhouette of a young, lonely Laura illustrates her sad beginnings. Pause. Mr. Dalton stops walking, absorbing the weight of the story. As they stand by the water, it's clear from Mr. Dalton's grimace that he is shocked by the revelation. Miss Lance laments Laura's misfortune, believing she would have led a much more refined life under different circumstances. Squeeze. She passionately urges Mr. Dalton to see Miss Pendleton for who she truly is. Miss Lance fiercely defends her friend, declaring that Laura's kind character and noble descent place her firmly in the upper class. She reveals that Laura's uncle vehemently opposed her acknowledgement, forcing a compromise where his son would inherit everything. Concluding that this is why Laura has no dowry, Miss Lance pleads with Mr. Dalton not to hold it against her. Mr. Dalton questions what there is to hold against her, prompting Miss Lance to spell out her concerns. Done, Miss Lance implores him to judge Laura on her character, not on her status as a part commoner by blood. Mr. Dalton scoffs lightly, asking if she truly thinks he is shallow enough to judge Laura for something beyond her control. He clarifies that his true sentiment on the matter is simply one of disbelief. Mutter. He quietly reflects that her history finally explains the source of her solitary nature. Misinterpreting his grimace, Miss Lance assumes he is disappointed to be associated with someone of questionable breeding. She believes there is no reason for him to look so grim over Laura's birth, unless he is hiding his true feelings. Mr. Dalton thanks her for her honesty, saying he is glad to know Miss Pendleton has such loyal friends. Glance. As Miss Lance beams, another woman calls for her to join a game. Bow. Mr. Dalton politely thanks Miss Lance for the walk and bids her farewell before turning to leave. Stride. As he departs, Miss Lance's friend wonders aloud if Mr. Dalton dislikes games. Miss Lance watches him go, wishing they could have spent more time together. When asked what they discussed, she smiles coyly, saying she is sure there will be another occasion. Stop. Walking alone, Mr. Dalton reflects that he never meant to stay in London for so long. Chatter. Ha ha ha. He stands apart from the other guests, thinking of the immense amount of work waiting for him. Rustle. He admits to himself that despite having no business there, he feels compelled to delay his departure day after day. In a soft-focused memory, Laura Pendleton appears serene and elegant. A vision of Laura in her picnic bonnet shows her smiling warmly. Mr. Dalton pictures himself and Laura standing together, a perfectly matched pair. He recalls a past gathering where he stood beside Laura's grandmother. In his memories, he became uncharacteristically open, sharing stories of his life with an attentive Laura. This newfound openness, he reflects, was a phenomenon previously inconceivable to him. Remembering her, a soft, fond smile graces Mr. Dalton's face. He finds it baffling that someone like her could be the subject of open derision. Recalling the cruel carriage gossip, he reflects on high society's obsession with pedigree and how their vapid words must have wounded her delicate heart. He considers the iron will she must possess to endure a lifetime of such lonely struggle. In his mind's eye, he and Laura sit together, their connection palpable. Clench. He resolves to be the one to offer her support. He longs to become her confidant and share the burden she carries. Yoo-hoo! A cheerful call interrupts his solitary thoughts. Turning toward the sound of chatter, he immediately recognizes that familiar voice. Splash. He discovers a game of stone skipping in progress, the thrower counting their skips. Whish! Mr. Fairfax groans as his throw fails, while Laura offers him encouragement, noting his improvement. Step. As Mr. Dalton approaches, Laura teases Mr. Fairfax about his choice of stone, and Miss Hyde chides him for making excuses. Mr. Fairfax spots his friend, warmly greeting him as Ian, old chap. Beam. Laura turns and gives Mr. Dalton a radiant smile, welcoming him back. She playfully invites him to join a wager on the stone skipping contest. Mr. Dalton stands beside a cheerful Laura, considering her offer. Mr. Dalton declines, calling Miss Hyde the clear winner and refusing to bet on a losing nag, much to Mr. Fairfax's chagrin. Chuckle. Miss Hyde dryly tells a protesting Mr. Fairfax that he has been weighed, measured, and found wanting. Tap. Miss Hyde turns to Mr. Dalton, challenging him to a friendly contest, while a tearful Mr. Fairfax claims to have hay fever. Mr. Dalton accepts with a charming smile, feigning trepidation at facing such a master. Delighted, Laura encourages the match, declaring she will be betting on his victory this time. As Laura cheers bravo, Mr. Fairfax questions her sudden change of allegiance from their previous match. Smile. Mr. Dalton looks on, amused by the friendly banter. Mr. Fairfax begs Ian to defend his honor, but Mr. Dalton wryly thinks it's beyond saving. Miss Hyde graciously offers Mr. Dalton the first throw, which he accepts. Dash. Doubting his throwing arm after so many years, Mr. Dalton takes a running start. Whish. He unleashes the stone, leaving Laura and Mr. Fairfax stunned by his form. He moves with surprising speed and grace along the water's edge. Bounce. Splosh. The stone skips perfectly across the glittering water. Bounce. A shocked Laura counts an incredible 18 skips as the stone flies across the lake. Miss Hyde cheers for Mr. Dalton's record-breaking throw, internally acknowledging she has found a worthy adversary. With a look of cool determination, she thinks that the match is far from over. Woo Laura and Mr. Fairfax now cheer for Jane, urging her to give him a thrashing as she prepares her turn. Squeeze. Miss Hyde focuses intently, clutching the smooth stone in her hand. Splish. Her throw is a roaring success, reaching a staggering 20 skips and setting a new record. Laura embraces Miss Hyde, congratulating her on the fine throw and impressive new record. Clap, clap. A beaming Mr. Fairfax applauds her skill, asking about her secret technique. As Mr. Fairfax and Miss Hyde become engrossed in conversation, a nearby woman notes their focus. Mr. Dalton seizes the opportunity, asking Miss Pendleton if she would like to find other amusements with him. The scene transitions to a peaceful view of the lake. Now in a rowboat, Laura agrees with Mr. Dalton, admitting the exciting stone-skipping contest made her forget about enlisting Mr. Fairfax as their oarsman. She laughs, saying Mr. Fairfax earned his rest since the game was his idea in the first place. Smile. Mr. Dalton gazes at her warmly, softly agreeing with whatever she says. A bead of sweat appears as he thinks to himself that he is now in a conundrum. The boat suddenly feels much smaller. Whoosh! A pleasant breeze brings a sudden tranquility. Ba-bump! His heart skips a beat as he blushes. She wonders how every moment can be so scintillating. He asks about a Miss Hyde, and she clarifies there is only one. He realizes she must be the one who refused William's offer. Puzzled, they share a moment of confusion. Slump. She recalls a tense stroll where Mr. Fairfax suggested skipping stones. She marvels that their friendship endured such crossed affections. She muses that companionship may have inspired the proposal. He asks her if a marriage based on friendship can be joyful. They discuss unconventional forms of matrimony. He argues marriage should be founded on a loving bond, not just friendship. She counters that intense passion can spark discord in a relationship. For a lasting partnership, she believes trust is more necessary than passion. She concedes that love certainly has its place in a marriage. She wonders if love is merely a prelude to the true symphony of companionship. After all, she concludes, even the most ardent melody must fade. He finds her observation astute, but cannot fully agree. He sees love as a treasure worth guarding at all costs. He believes some affections are far more enduring. He concludes that they can make one a permanent captive until death. Smile. She offers him a gentle, knowing smile. She wishes for him to find such a love for himself someday. He inwardly laments the endless, overwhelming talk of love. Squeeze. He battles ungentlemanly urges brought on by her proximity. Wish. He finds himself craving her touch and her lips. Gasp. She calls his name, snapping him out of his thoughts. Arg. He internally panics, desperately telling his heart to be still. Worried by his pale face, she suggests they go ashore for him to rest. She helps him ashore, apologizing for the exertion. As her grasp makes him more flustered, she suggests resting on a nearby boulder. Rustle. They approach a large, flat rock beneath the trees. Stare! He feels her gentle gaze as a sorcerer's charm. Brush. He invites her to sit with him for a moment. Chuckle. She smiles brightly in response. Wish! The water glints peacefully in the sunlight. They sit together on the rock, enjoying the quiet view. She asks if the forests of his home, Whitefield, are similar to this one. He smiles, replying that the differences are not stark. He explains that the groves there are mostly populated with white birches. She calls him fortunate to live among such natural wonders. They debate the merits of city versus country life. She notes that while London offers opportunity, it can also be draining. She laughs, admitting she has no desire to return to the city's noise and smoke. He wishes they were in the verdant woods of Whitefield. He paints a picture of a restful evening at Whitefield Hall. He promises a new adventure would await her in the forest come morning. Swap. He thinks about how long she could stay. He invites her to stay at his home for as long as she pleases. Laura's voice graciously accepts his kind and delightful notion. Sitting beside her, Mr. Dalton assures Miss Pendleton his offer to visit Whitefield was genuine and that she would be an honored guest. He adds that his staff would be excited to host a guest for once. Beaming with appreciation, Miss Pendleton promises that one day she will take him up on his generous offer to see the land he cherishes. She then adds that she selfishly hopes he will have found a lady for the house by the time of her visit. Mr. Dalton remains silent for a moment, a subtle smile on his lips. He surprises Laura by asking if a lady of the house is truly necessary. She explains that it would be highly improper for her to visit a gentleman who lives alone as a bachelor. Mr. Dalton warns that it may be some time before a lady presents herself in his life, but says he will await her invitation in London regardless. Beam. The thought fills Laura with joyful anticipation. She expresses her excitement to not only see the greenery of Whitefield, but also to be in the company of the Dalton newlyweds. Clench. At her words, Mr. Dalton's hand tightens into a fist. He tells her that her wish provides him with the incentive to find a lady wife with all haste. Mr. Dalton declares he will make a promise a condition of his matrimony, that Miss Pendleton would forever be an esteemed guest at Whitefield Hall. Laura expresses her surprise, saying that would be unfair to his wife, as most women would not be fond of their husband's female friends. He counters by asking what she would do if his future wife shared his sentiments, and Laura agrees she would be delighted to attend in such a case. Whoosh! A leaf blows past as she admits that she finds such a circumstance difficult to imagine. Mr. Dalton insists it is no stretch of the imagination for him, declaring that his wife would hold her in no lesser regard than he does. He looks at her intensely, stating that this guarantee would be his sole and inviolable condition for marriage. Whoosh! Laura stares back, stunned by the weight of his declaration. Mr. Dalton's expression remains fixed and serious. A close-up shows the crisp knot of his cravat. Spring. As he begins to apologize for his candor, she abruptly stands up. Laura gets to her feet, turning away from him. She tells him his future lady would be dismayed by his words and requests his invitation be extended only in the spirit of friendship. With her back to him, Miss Pendleton makes her feelings on the matter clear. Wish. He reaches for her as she pulls away, bidding him good day and saying she will return on her own. Rush. She quickly departs, leaving Mr. Dalton alone on the stone bench. Mr. Dalton looks on in dismay, wondering if he just imposed a tawdry marriage proposal upon Miss Pendleton. He berates himself for proposing moments after she made it clear she considers him no more than a friend. He calls himself a fool, realizing it is no wonder he was jilted. Sigh. Defeated, he sits with his head in his hand. Whoosh! He reflects that he made a brute of his words, pushing his own feelings over hers as if he expected refusal. He admits to himself that a proposal was inevitable, whether by impulse or not, as his daydreams in London had convinced him. He recalls visions of placing a ring on her finger, followed by an engagement ceremony. A memory of them walking together in a grand hall solidifies his intentions. Sigh. He laments his abrupt proposal and her swift rejection, acknowledging it was hardly the pinnacle of romance. Grab. He snatches his handkerchief, resolving to explain himself to Miss Pendleton immediately. Standing with renewed purpose, he believes that once she understands his profound love, she will reconsider. He is certain she will see his proposal in a favorable light. His search is cut short when Miss Hyde informs him that Miss Pendleton left a while ago to tend to urgent business. Mr. Dalton questions the urgent business, and Miss Hyde explains that Laura seemed to be in such a rush that she had her own coachman escort her home. Miss Hyde asks why he was looking for Miss Pendleton, and he admits their conversation was left unfinished. Miss Hyde cryptically warns that their conversation may be delayed longer than he expects, as the Pendleton house is unlikely to host guests anytime soon. Whoosh! She mentions a visiting relative, and as the wind blows, she promises to keep Mr. Dalton entertained. The next day, Mr. Dalton stands before the Pendleton residence as a maid apologizes, stating the household is not accepting visitors. She confirms she is under strict instructions to turn away all callers. As she begins to close the door, he asks if he can leave a letter for Miss Pendleton. The maid firmly denies his request, stating she is not at liberty to receive any gifts or letters. A dejected Mr. Dalton acknowledges he should have expected this, but that the cold shoulder stings, hoping for better luck another day. A crestfallen Mr. Dalton leaves the Pendleton residence. The upper windows of the grand house remain closed. He walks on with a somber, thoughtful expression. From inside, a figure watches him depart. Step. It is Miss Pendleton, her expression unreadable. Sigh. Laura watches from the window as he leaves. Sigh. The silence of the room is heavy. Frustrated, Mr. Dalton begins a letter, admitting he is at his wit's end. He narrates his failed daily visits, recalling being turned away by the maid and left to linger like an unpleasant scent. He fears the doors to her heart are shut for good, their connection destined to wither and be forgotten. He sits in despair, running a hand through his hair. Yell Mr. Fairfax's boisterous greeting startles a distraught Mr. Dalton, who claims he was nearly frightened to death. Mr. Fairfax observes his friend is not himself, but Mr. Dalton dismisses his concern. His friend presents him with a telegram. Mr. Dalton reads the message, a subtle change in his expression. At the Pendleton estate, a voice offers an apology. The maid confirms the Pendletons are not receiving guests, but Mr. Dalton asks her to pass a package to Laura. When the maid refuses the gift, he pleads with her to make an exception for an urgent matter. He explains he is departing for Yorkshire, but the maid coldly suggests he use the post office. Glance. Checking his watch, Mr. Dalton insists he lacks the time. He tries a new tactic, offering her a job up north, but she scoffs at being a country girl. Sigh. Slip. Defeated, he resorts to a bribe, asking it be considered a personal favor. The maid pauses, carefully considering his desperate offer. Mr. Dalton waits anxiously with his back to her. Swish? The maid accepts the money from his hand. She returns the money, stating she'd prefer to be repaid with a favor of her own. In exchange for delivering the letter, she demands his word that he will return to London. Clop. She urges him to handle his business, but to return and fight for Laura's affections, lest his efforts be wasted. Sigh. Mr. Dalton considers her challenge, musing on the idea of a fight. Sunlight streams through the windows of the quiet house. Tap. The maid presents Miss Pendleton with the package. Laura asks who sent the parcel, and the maid credits the intrepid Mr. Dalton. Laura reminds her maid, Anne, of the strict orders, but Anne insists she had no choice. The package sits on the desk, tied with a simple ribbon. Sigh. Holding the gift, Laura thinks to herself how obstinate he is. She opens the package and begins to read his letter. The letter is addressed formally with his utmost compliments. In a flashback, Mr. Dalton is seen diligently writing at his desk. He begins by regretting his sudden departure from the city, which he felt compelled to explain in writing. He informs her that the vicar of his parish, Mr. Genfield, has passed away. He must return to Whitefield to offer condolences and appoint a successor. He vows to return to London swiftly, unable to bear the state of disrepair in their friendship. The image of a closed door symbolizes their current distance. He assures her of no ill will, wishing only to rebuild their acquaintance upon his return. As he boards a train, he humbly asks for a chance to explain his ungentlemanly conduct. "Your faithful friend, Ian Dalton." She puts the letter down, her expression pensive. "Russell." Her eyes widen as she discovers something else in the package. It is a beautiful watercolor painting of his estate at Whitefield. Anne reveals the painting is Mr. Dalton's own work, prompting Laura to call him a man of many talents. The watercolor painting depicts a grand manor nestled in rolling, tree-covered hills. Anne explains to a surprised Laura that the painting is of Whitefield, Mr. Dalton's estate. Laura hands the painting back to her maid, who accepts it dutifully. Glance. Anne looks aside, wondering what deep sentiments Mr. Dalton was so eager to convey with the hand-painted gift. She recalls how close he and Laura seemed only a few days prior. The painting of Whitefield now hangs in a frame on the wall. A clock on the mantelpiece marks the passage of time. Fidget. Alone in the dark, Laura holds the letter, her hands unsteady. She sits pensively on the windowsill, rereading his words by the moonlight. Knock, knock. A sudden sound at the door breaks the silence. Slip. Getting to her feet, Laura invites the visitor to come in. Clack. Slide. Anne enters with a tray, asking to help her turn in, but Laura requests another moment. Anne notices the letter on a silver tray, realizing Miss Laura must have been reading it repeatedly. The maid's curiosity grows, wondering if the desperately delivered letter was a confession of love or even a marriage proposal. Brush. Seeing Laura's somber reflection, Anne concludes it couldn't have been a proposal. Gasp! Just as Anne internally despairs over her curiosity, Laura asks to confide in her, and Anne eagerly agrees. Laura reveals Mr. Dalton made remarks that could be construed as a marriage proposal, shocking a delighted Anne, who exclaims, "I knew it!" As Anne brushes her hair, Laura clarifies that while he didn't propose directly, his demeanor strongly implied it. Brush. Anne correctly guesses this is why they have been refusing all visitors, and Laura admits her behavior must seem odd. Anne observes that few ladies would go to such lengths to avoid a suitor, unless something was amiss. She then asks directly if Laura intends to refuse him. A single tear falls, as Laura closes her eyes. Laura confirms she will refuse him, prompting a disappointed Anne to ask her to reconsider such a fine man. Anne apologizes for speaking out of turn, but says it's senseless for Laura to cower away. A past memory shows a suitor kneeling before a lady. Laura explains that it is not so simple. As a woman of her station, turning down a man of Mr. Dalton's stature would be a great affront. She mentions her lack of a dowry, but Anne insists Mr. Dalton would have known her circumstances before declaring his feelings. Laura looks down sadly, stating that declarations of love do not always lead to marriage. A painful memory of a passionate embrace surfaces as she reflects that fleeting passion rarely becomes a promise of a lifetime. Anne listens in thoughtful silence. Brush. Cutting through the painful memories, Anne asks what Laura's heart is telling her now. Squeeze. She grips Laura's shoulders firmly, demanding to know if she truly feels nothing for Mr. Dalton. Laura looks ahead, her expression still and conflicted. Slide. She turns away, remaining silent and avoiding the pointed question. Laura dismisses the question, asking what the honor of being an unwed woman is for. Russell. Looking out the window, she concludes it allows her the freedom to befriend a gentleman without suspicion. She states with forced confidence that she feels no romantic desire for him. A shocked Anne tells her she does not need convincing. Clack. Having been rebuffed, Anne bids Miss Laura good night and departs. Laura is left alone with her thoughts by the window. Russell. She rereads the letter, noting his meticulous handwriting reflects the courtesy of his words. Standing with the letter, she muses on how thoughtful he was to write during his urgent business. She thinks to herself that he is an exemplary gentleman, perhaps even the finest, just as Anne said. A memory of Mr. Dalton's intense, serious gaze flashes through her mind. Flinch. The sudden memory causes her to flinch and drop the letter. His letter lies open on the floor. Crouch. Kneeling, she wonders when her heart became such a mystery, admitting she deliberately saw him as a friend and assumed he felt the same. In a memory, she stands apart from him, believing herself an unworthy match for a man of his standing. Squeeze. She clutches the letter, admitting she is thankful he was called away up north. Looking at the image of his home, she hopes that instead of growing fonder, his absence will cool his affections for her. Laura's thoughts swirl with conflict and regret. She questions why she waited by the window all week for a man she planned to refuse, admitting his departure letter left her in despair as she reread his promise to return. Brush. She runs her thumb over the letter. Acknowledging this desire is a familiar sentiment that can never be permitted. Kneeling alone in her room, she calls it a selfish pang of the heart that she knows from experience will leave behind decades of hurt. A memory of holding a man's hand surfaces as she recalls a time when nothing else seemed to matter. Fidget. Her hand trembles as she touches the locket around her neck. She opens the locket, revealing a portrait of a beautiful woman. A voice from her past tenderly asks her to look. In a flashback, a younger Laura stands before an older woman with styled gray hair. The woman looks at her with a blush of concern, asking a question. A voice urges young Laura to save her tears. A man in a hat and coat kneels before her, holding her hands and promising they will not be parted forever. Sniffle. The tearful young girl listens as he asks her to wait for the right time. Her father asks her to have faith that he will go through heaven and hell to find her again. Pat. He touches the locket, asking her to keep it always and to look inside whenever she needs to. Her father tips his hat, his face obscured by shadow. The narration recalls this painful memory from when she was 7, the day she was entrusted to Pendleton House. Creak. The door opens, revealing a man. A very young Laura sits on the floor, clutching a teddy bear, looking up at the newcomer. Her maternal uncle, Mr. Gerald Pendleton, viewed his niece with disdain, believing her existence was an affront to the family name. A shadow on the floor depicts a man pointing and yelling at a smaller figure. The young Laura stands alone, anxiously clutching her dress. Her uncle was a tyrant who terrorized her, forcing her to flee from his angry outbursts and thrown objects. Laura endured a miserable existence by being unseen and unheard, while her grandmother, Lady Abigail, grew weary of fighting with her son on Laura's behalf. After 3 years, Lady Abigail gave up and sent Laura away to a respectable boarding school for girls. Despite the family's distinguished reputation, rumors about Laura's origins became a staple of school gossip, which the studious girl ignored. She engrossed herself in her studies, earning countless merits and high grades through diligence. She still endeavored to be kind and amiable to her peers. She repressed herself in the futile and Herculean effort to be seen as Laura, the model pupil. Meanwhile, Lady Abigail filed a suit in the Court of Chancery for the right to formally adopt her granddaughter. She also amended her last will and testament, signing over her entire fortune to Laura. Years later, on the day of 17-year-old Laura's graduation, her journey did not lead back to Pendleton Manor. A surprised Laura is instead led by a smiling Lady Abigail to the gates of an elegant townhouse in the heart of London. The two stand together before their grand new home. Lady Abigail arranged a swift debut into London's high society, expecting fanfare for the high-achieving debutante. But the city's elites remembered the old scandals, foiling their plans and making Laura an undeserving pariah once more. For the next dozen years, Laura lingered on the fringes of society, forced to reckon with her lesser status and debase her own self-esteem. Click. This was how she learned to hide from the world's contempt, closing herself off so she wouldn't crumble. She reflects that a dalliance born of passion is a whim she knows all too well. A memory of a happy couple surfaces as she thinks of the catastrophic outcome, fearing the ignominy she endured would be passed down to her own children. She puts the letter from Mr. Dalton into a drawer, admitting to herself that she is undeniably fond of him, and for that very reason, she concludes it is only proper to set those feelings aside. Clop. The sound of a horse's hooves echoes through a sunny, tree-lined road. A carriage travels across a picturesque bridge in the countryside. Clop. Inside, a pensive Mr. Dalton arrives at his destination, Whitefield Hall, Yorkshire. Creak. Stepping into a grand foyer, he is greeted by a butler named Ramswick, who welcomes him back. Mr. Dalton replies that it is good to be home. Mr. Dalton stands tall in his traveling coat, his expression somber and determined. Grab? As Ramswick takes his hat, he commends his master for returning to his duties so soon and asks if the funeral service was satisfactory. Mr. Dalton confirms it was a calm affair. Ramswick narrates that many parishioners gathered for Vicar Genfield's funeral, a testament to his good reputation. Mr. Dalton holds his hat, expressing his regret for being absent during the vicar's final days. He instructs Ramswick to have a cottage cleaned for the vicar's bereaved family, and the butler agrees. Mr. Dalton stops Ramswick with another request. He kindly asks about Ramswick's knee, which the butler reports is much improved. Relieved, Mr. Dalton thanks Ramswick for his service during his long absence. A young maid carrying linens asks Ramswick if Mr. Dalton has returned from the funeral. Seeing her looking puzzled, Ramswick asks if something is on her mind. The maid notes that Mr. Dalton rarely leaves his estate, making his recent long trip highly unusual. Ramswick thoughtfully agrees with her observation. He decides internally that the staff must not speculate on their master's business. Mr. Dalton rests wearily on a chaise lounge, his arm covering his eyes. Grab. He thinks that after only 2 months in London, he has returned to a mountain of paperwork. Sitting up, he reviews documents detailing quarrels among farmers and various social calls. He makes a mental note to inspect the reopened mine and meet with his solicitor. Spring. He sits up abruptly, realizing the most pressing issue is the estate steward, who has been running the estate into the ground. As he puts on his coat, he concludes the derelict steward, who also took bribes, must be dismissed immediately. Fumi recalls how William's elder brother recommended the steward, a man he reluctantly hired. Rise. He stands, annoyed that he trusted an introduction from a Fairfax, which revealed the man's own carelessness. Now, thanks to the former steward's incompetence, Mr. Dalton is left with a deluge of business. Later that night, he decides to put the paperwork aside for the moment. Standing by the window, he finally feels he is truly home after a long day. He reflects on his month-long trip to London, surprised that most of the memories have already faded. Pause. He pauses while reaching for a cigar. A memory of a lady in a beautiful pink dress flashes through his mind. He holds the cigar, lost in a sudden poignant thought. He recalls dancing with a woman at a ball, admitting he feels a pang of envy for even a fictional partner she might have. Imagining her looking out a window, he wonders if they are both alone under the same sky. His thoughts remain entirely focused on her. He imagines them standing on opposite sides of a window, questioning if she longs for his presence in return. His expression grows somber. He decides against the hopeful thought, concluding it is unlikely. Remembering how firmly she refused his advances, he tells himself it would be nonsensical to harbor false hope. Even so, the strange manner of her refusal continues to confound him. He puzzles over why she would preemptively reject a proposal with such a steely, unfeeling demeanor. Nod. He hopes her rejection was not born of personal disdain. He can see no superficial reason for her to turn him down, as his own reputation wouldn't be harmed. TSS's. He cuts his cigar, resolving that he can still earn Miss Pendleton's favor. A memory of him kneeling before her, earnestly holding her hands, returns to him. He believes that with her customary earnestness, she will grant him the patience and attention he seeks. His expression softens with a hint of hope, but he also considers the possibility that she will simply deny him again. The image of his heartfelt plea remains vivid in his mind. Droop. He slumps in his chair, acknowledging that Miss Pendleton is a woman for whom principles must be upheld above all else. He clasps his hands, his gaze firm and resolute. Stacks of books and papers fill the room. With renewed determination, he looks up and vows to make it so. Several days later at Whitefield Hall, Ramswick notes that his master's behavior has been strange of late. The butler observes that Master Ian has not been himself. He watches Mr. Dalton sketching by the window, noting his mind seems to be hundreds of miles away, lost in daydreams. Ramswick gets Master Ian's attention. Ian responds as his butler presents documents regarding retiring staff. Ramswick notes his master's unusual distraction, suspecting something happened in London to occupy his thoughts. Hidden among the papers, he spots a drawing of a woman. Ian quickly reviews and signs the documents, handing them back. Step. Ramswick departs from the study. Step. 2 maids watch the butler leave. Looking puzzled, the maids gossip in disbelief, having seen Mr. Ramswick smiling from ear to ear. Tap. Back in his study, Ian turns his attention to his sketchbook. He smirks, deciding to write to his meddlesome sister about his time in the city. Squeeze. Now dressed for travel, Ian informs Ramswick he must return to London in a few days. He adds that his stay will be longer this time, and instructs Ramswick to hire a new steward. Ramswick agrees to post an advertisement while he is away. Clop. As Ian rides away, Ramswick presumes his master's business pertains to the lady in the portrait. The butler smiles warmly, hoping for good news soon. He rides along the carriageway toward Dunville Park, hoping there have been no issues during his absence. Bang. A sudden gunshot startles him. Hearing chatter, he assumes his brother-in-law is hunting nearby. Jolt. The sound seems unusual, making him pause and listen intently. He pulls his horse to a halt to investigate the disturbance. Clip-clop. The sound of hooves echoes as he moves through the woods. Clop. He hears a child's voice shouting that it's their turn. He sees 2 young boys bickering in the woods. The boys continue to argue over whose turn it is. Jolt. Their argument halts when one of them spots their Uncle Ian approaching. Hop. He dismounts as his 2 nephews greet him with nervous surprise. Done. He sternly holds out his hand, demanding they give him something. The boy explains it's just a wooden toy revolver for their hunting game. Chill. Calling him Daniel Fairfax, Ian warns him not to make him ask twice for the toy. The scene shifts to a grand estate, Dunville Park. Inside a lavish room, a woman sits with her back to the door. She thoughtfully examines a spread of cards on the table. Clunk! As she contemplates the cards, the doors behind her open. She turns and warmly welcomes Ian into the room. The woman is identified as Margaret Fairfax, Ian Dalton's elder sister. Thunk! He places something on the table, and she looks up in surprise. Seeing a real revolver, she jokingly asks if he's staging a robbery. Margaret wryly comments on her son's poor choice of a, quote, mark. Chuckle. She explains she has already disciplined the boys by assigning them stable duty. Margaret casually invites him to look at her cards, but Ian sternly questions her priorities, reminding her the boys had a loaded gun. Unfazed, she brushes off his concern with, all is well that ends well, much to Ian's annoyance. Sigh. He questions her childish pastimes, but she steers the conversation to his trip, asking about a serendipitous encounter in London. A close-up reveals her tarot cards, the Lovers, 10 of Swords, and the Star. He flatly denies that any such encounter took place. Margaret calls his bluff, revealing her informant William told her everything, much to Ian's private fury. She lists his uncharacteristically social activities, including attending a picnic. She continues to tease him about his newfound concern for politeness. Ding! Ian remains silent and annoyed as his sister presses him. Margaret finally names Miss Pendleton as the lady who commanded his attention in London. Spring Ian rises abruptly to leave, but Margaret is suddenly racked by a violent coughing fit. Cough. Ian panics as Margaret grabs his arm, shouting for help as her coughing fit worsens. Wish! A flustered Ian realizes her entire act was a ploy to confirm his interest in the lady. She gleefully hugs her exasperated brother, who begs the heavens for salvation. Margaret playfully guesses the mysterious lady's age, presuming she is 21 or 22. He looks annoyed as his sister eagerly insists on hearing every detail about this delightful young lady. She continues to tease him, comparing his lovelorn expression to that of a jilted youth. Turn. He coolly turns away, stating for the record that there is no romantic affection on either side. Margaret eyes him skeptically, finding his story of simple friendship unlikely. She threatens to entertain his lady friend with his embarrassing old letters from his youth, shocking him. A memory surfaces of a very young Ian, handing a letter to his seated sister. The letter reveals a tearful, childish promise that his brotherly love will always be with her. She admits his tear-smudged, misspelled letter moved her, much to his present-day embarrassment. Shout! She dramatically recalls crying so much over his sweet words that she could barely walk down the aisle. She proposes a scheme to use the letter as a testament to his character to win over Miss Pendleton. Wince. He realizes with dread that his sister's threat is very real. She pats his back, laughing and claiming it's all just harmless, sisterly curiosity. Dropping the act, Margaret asks if Miss Pendleton dislikes him. He admits she seems to like him on a personal level. She asks if he is certain the lady won't accept his proposal for reasons he can't understand, and he sadly nods. His sister thoughtfully advises him to simply remain her friend for the time being. She suggests he should respect the lady's wishes and perhaps befriend other women in her social circle. Puzzled, Ian stands with his arms crossed, questioning the purpose of such a strategy. Margaret gives him a knowing smile, her plan already in motion. She explains that wearing down the fortress of her heart with fondness will create his chance. He scoffs at the idea, asking why he would resort to such tawdry, manipulative means. As Margaret welcomes him to her theater, she explains that love sometimes needs trials and tribulations to grow. She predicts that a seed of jealousy will make the lady realize her longing and admiration for him. Sigh. She presents her plan as sage advice, but Ian wearily disagrees. Grab. He accuses her of making light of his predicament and suggesting he toy with the heart of the woman he loves. He turns to leave as she asks if he is departing so soon. Clunk. After he's gone, Margaret sits back, musing that she knew he would react that way. Looking over her tarot cards, she notes that he specifically called Miss Pendleton the lady he loves. Smirk. Confident in her reading, she declares that Whitefield Hall will soon have a new lady of the house. The scene shifts to an elegant, blonde-haired woman in a fine dress. Clack. At the manor house of Baronet Lance, a woman laments that Mr. Dalton had to leave for Whitefield. Two women have tea, with one confirming he left in quite a hurry. Babump. The blonde woman in the purple-tinged dress blushes, thinking the gossip is a delight. The narration praises her as the season's most radiant and sought-after flower. The other blonde woman, wearing white, sips her tea with a serene expression. In a private moment, she lets a small, blushing smile grace her lips. Dudon. A thought suddenly strikes her, leaving her utterly flabbergasted. The scene finds her later, standing by a window and intently reading a letter. Her eyes widen in shock as she reads that Mr. Dalton has already departed from London. She stares at the letter in disbelief, desperately wondering why and when he could have left. Phew. She recalls her fruitful tea time, suspecting that Mr. Fairfax's sister Janet might hold the key to his sudden disappearance. At the party, a Miss Lance asks Janet Fairfax if Mr. Dalton will return to London, but Janet expresses doubt. Janet speculates that he might not return south for several more years. Phew. Miss Lance is relieved to hear it was just Janet's conjecture, and not something Mr. Dalton had told her. As days pass, there is still no news from Mr. Dalton at Whitefield. The blonde woman in white feels it would be inappropriate to write him, as their acquaintance is still so new. A blonde woman is startled as a man approaches. A blonde-haired man gives a warm, charming smile. The two women are joined by the blonde man, Mr. Fairfax, whom they invite to tea. Clink. One woman finishes her tea, inviting him to join them before dinner. Hee hee. Mr. Fairfax playfully teases his sister, then thanks Miss Lance for tolerating her. Ha ha. Miss Lance laughs, saying it was a pleasure as she longed to befriend the Fairfax siblings. Mr. Fairfax extends his hand, inviting Miss Lance to the dining room. Miss Lance's internal plan is revealed. She'll befriend the Fairfaxes to get news of Mr. Dalton. She also privately admits that Mr. Fairfax is a fine gentleman himself. To build their friendship, Miss Lance suggests an outing to the performing arts with Miss Fairfax. The scene shifts to the Pendleton townhouse. A woman with reddish-brown hair at her desk is told her post has arrived. Freeze. Her attention is caught by a particular letter among the post. She looks up with a serious expression after seeing the letter. She holds the letter, addressed from Gerald Pendleton to Laura Pendleton. Laura finds it odd that the letter from her uncle is addressed directly to her. Gulp. She nervously notes the letter's terse, direct content. She sits at her desk, engrossed in the mysterious letter. Sigh. She feels a sense of relief at the letter's directness. The letter recounts an anecdote involving her uncle and his son Charles, half a year prior. In the United States, Charles met a Mr. Thomas Price, an old acquaintance of Uncle Gerald. A silhouetted portrait suggests a memory of a couple. Laura reads that Mr. Price has already traveled to London for a family celebration. She recognizes the name, recalling the American gentleman who recently appeared in society. Mr. Thomas Price is described as an ambitious Wall Street financier who has captivated London. He was British-born but emigrated to America, where he raised a large family. After his wife's passing, he returned to England after 30 years, ostensibly for an anniversary. But his presence as both a countryman and a foreigner has set London society abuzz with speculation. Gossipers debate his motives, wondering if he seeks a new, younger wife or still mourns his last. Mr. Price's arrival is a major topic of intrigue, with everyone speculating about his true intentions. Fold. Her duty, the letter states, is to ensure Mr. Price receives a cordial reception. Feeling overwhelmed, she buries her face in her hands, recalling a gentle memory for courage. Her main hope is to avoid her uncle's tyrannical nature. However, she worries how the situation will affect her grandmother. A memory of a doctor's grim prognosis surfaces. Her ladyship may not outlast the year. The doctor stressed that her grandmother must avoid any discontent to aid her recovery. Laura worries that this news could cause her grandmother to have a relapse. Tap. Her grandmother's voice interrupts her thoughts, asking if Gerald's alumnus is in London. Laura stands before her grandmother, who asks if the man intends to visit them. Her grandmother calls her name, and Laura dutifully responds. Laura is shocked when her grandmother orders her to prepare the finest guest room. Her grandmother decides to write an invitation, stating Mr. Price has every right to be welcomed. The elderly woman gives a faint, knowing smile. Reach. The grandmother beckons Laura closer. Taking her granddaughter's hands, she asks if she is startled, and Laura admits she is. Kneeling, Laura listens as her grandmother confesses she, too, feels tense about the situation. Clasp. Her grandmother firmly grasps her hands, asking for a personal favor. She asks Laura to be an angel for the next several days, for her sake. Bustle. Laura immediately begins directing staff to prepare for their guest's arrival. Bustle. A maid asks Miss Laura where to place the flowers, and she directs them to the drawing room mantelpiece. Laura continues to manage the household, instructing Roy to have the roof fixed. Kneeling before her seated grandmother, Laura listens with a somber expression. Her grandmother speaks of time's passage and a desire that must be fulfilled. She confesses her wish to make amends with her son, and Laura looks up in quiet surprise. Asking for forgiveness for her selfish wish, the grandmother's voice fades as Laura inspects fine china with the chef, Laura oversees preparations in the garden, ensuring everything is perfect for the upcoming event. Laura reaffirms her devotion, recalling how her grandmother became her mother and vowing to make her proud. Alone in her room, Laura kneels by her bed in a moment of quiet reflection. Rustle. She reviews her extensive to-do list, planning the welcome banquet and overseeing long-neglected roof repairs. She wonders what it will take to be the perfect, impeccable host her grandmother needs. A memory of a portrait surfaces. She reflects on how her grandmother fought with her own son to give her a privileged life. Lying in bed, she accepts her duty to repay her grandmother's sacrifices with joy and gratitude. Closing her eyes, she quietly admits that in all her years, she has never known a father's love. Rattle. A distant memory surfaces of her as a small child, sleeping on her father's lap during a train ride. Rattle. The memory shows her younger self sleeping soundly and peacefully under her father's care. She fondly recalls simple memories of holding his hand on woodland strolls and wandering through new towns. His comforting smile is recalled, a memory tinged with the sadness of their final parting. She understood he was a nomad at heart, a man for whom the rigors of parenthood were impossible. She came to believe he had simply made the most prudent choice by leaving her behind. Yet, she still finds herself wondering what could have been if she and her father had never parted ways. She knows she wouldn't have had such a nurturing environment to thrive in, as a memory shows her happy youth. Still, she feels the pull of an unfettered life, a siren song of joy she's never experienced. She looks at the portrait again, affirming that her grandmother has been nothing short of a guardian angel. A memory of her younger self kneeling before her grandmother fills her with resolve. She became the very picture of a respectable lady, to give her grandmother pride and comfort in her final years. But she always felt like a half-polished jewel, walking on eggshells with a constant smile for a disdainful society. Crumple. She wonders if the simple life of a mere Laura would suit her as her hand clenches a letter. Sitting on the edge of her bed, she stares down at the letter in her hands. She dreads her future, picturing high society gloating at her downfall if she were cast out penniless. Squeeze. As the dreaded day of her grandmother's passing nears, she accepts that the duty to honor her rests solely on her. She resolves to grant her grandmother's final wishes, reconciliation with her son, and a peaceful end. With newfound serenity, Laura prepares to face what's to come. Days later at the dinner party, Laura, addressed as Miss Pendleton, warmly hugs a blonde woman named Miss Hyde. Miss Hyde expresses her desire to introduce a new acquaintance, immediately capturing Laura's attention. Laura asks Miss Hyde about her work, and Miss Hyde eagerly describes the new things she's learning as a typist. Their conversation is interrupted by a man who believes they have not yet been introduced. A friendly man with light brown hair smiles warmly, introducing himself as Thomas Price. Laura formally welcomes Mr. Price to Pendleton House, identifying herself as the niece of his acquaintance, Gerald. After Laura introduces Miss Jane Hyde, Mr. Price expresses his honor at meeting them both. Mr. Price compliments Miss Hyde's practical dress, prompting Laura to explain her friend's recent employment as a typist. Miss Hyde explains she chose her career path specifically to avoid the prospect of marriage. Haha, Mr. Price praises her as a true lady of discernment, much to her surprise. When Miss Hyde notes he's the first to praise her choice, he cryptically suggests he knows a secret she's already discovered. Intrigued, Miss Hyde asks about this secret knowledge, which he claims most ladies eventually discover. He laughingly reveals the secret, that the husband is the real ball and chain, joking his late wife would gladly agree. Ha ha! Laura inwardly expresses relief that Miss Hyde was present to react to the man's odd joke for her. Clop. As a carriage arrives outside, Mr. Price suggests they join the other guests in the drawing room. Over dinner, Mr. Price captivates the table with tales from his decades living in the United States. His fascinating anecdotes of New York high society hold the other dinner guests in rapt attention. Mr. Price's boisterous, American manner of speaking is described as charmingly forward. His leisurely ease and conversational gusto charm the guests, smoothing over any potential discord. In a quiet moment, Laura plays the piano in a sunlit room. Later, Mr. Price thanks Miss Pendleton for a truly memorable dinner. Another gentleman praises her for providing another wonderfully pleasant evening. A third guest declares she has set an exceedingly high bar for London dinner parties. Phew. After another guest departs, an exhausted Laura collapses, glad that Mr. Price and her uncle are pleased. Groan. She privately admits that while Mr. Price is pleasant, every visit gives her a ringing headache. Lying on the sofa, she reflects on how the endless parties would have exhausted any hostess. However, she welcomed the distraction from her emotional disarray. recalling a smiling, dark-haired man. The evenings passed one after another, marked by lavish dinners. After one party, Laura helps her fatigued grandmother, Lady Abigail, up the stairs to her room. At Mr. Price's request, Laura plays a quiet piece for him in the empty drawing room. Stare. She feels a sense of unease, noticing that Mr. Price seems to be sitting closer than usual. Mr. Price confesses his first priority upon arriving in London was to meet her. She asks if her uncle had mentioned her. Haha, he laughs, confirming that her uncle spoke of her so highly he couldn't wait to meet her himself. Pause. Her hands freeze on the keys as he says she has exceeded his every expectation of an English rose. Bump. Finding the situation peculiar, Laura feels her heart beat with unease. Bump. Mr. Price looks on, a slight blush on his cheeks as his own heart seems to race. Wish. A sudden, shocking realization dawns on Laura, her eyes widening in alarm. A voice from the doorway asks if everything is all right inside. A maid stands in the doorway explaining she thought she heard a squeal. A sudden vision fills Laura's mind, Mr. Price kneeling before her, holding her hand in a proposal. The maid, Anne, exclaims in shock, but Laura dismisses her, saying it's nothing. Clack. Laura looks down, her expression troubled by the sudden turn of events. Mr. Price asks her not to be alarmed, requesting only that she allow him to say his piece. He speaks of yearning for a traditional lady, hoping to find a serendipitous love, as he did with his late wife. He explains that at her dinner party, he found a woman who was the very likeness of his wife in every way. Kneeling before her, he takes her hands and asks for the honor of taking her as his wife. He invites her to begin a new life with him in America, leaving Laura utterly stunned. Clasp. He reassures her that her age is no hindrance, as he desires a wife of wisdom and kindness. Looking up at a shocked Laura, he asks if she accepts his proposal. With forced composure, Laura tells him she is afraid she cannot accept his generous offer. Slip. She gently pulls her hand from his, stating she feels no romantic connection and never will, as she curtsies politely. Two maids watch in surprise as daily flower deliveries from Mr. Price begin arriving at the house. Having learned her social schedule, he began appearing at every event she attended, much to her discomfort. An endless stream of beautiful bouquets continues to arrive for her. His conspicuous pursuit of the apprehensive Miss Pendleton soon became a major topic of gossip. Astonishingly, the unanimous consensus in society was that the proposal was a great opportunity for her. Society gossips whisper that it's her last chance to escape spinsterdom and that she's fortunate a wealthy man is interested. Others remark that she must accept to save herself from a future of squalor. Though the remarks were veiled in concern, an undercurrent of anxious disquiet was undeniable. The true sentiment is revealed, as one woman declares she'd rather die than let her daughter face the same fate. Laura Pendleton becomes a cautionary tale for young debutantes, her plight looming over every upper-class household. In the Fairfax drawing room, Mr. Fairfax firmly tells Miss Lance to stop discussing the absurd pairing, calling it an insult. Miss Lance confesses her mother calls her naive for her sympathy, but her friends seem to disagree with her mother's view. Mr. Fairfax internally notes that Miss Lance must be quite frustrated to seek him out for a sympathetic ear. Miss Lance finds the man's relentless pursuit unfair, but Mr. Fairfax suggests her rejection was gentle due to his connection to her uncle. Miss Lance exclaims that the man is old enough to be her father, and Mr. Fairfax concedes that such a match would be offensive. Thrilled, Miss Lance praises Mr. Fairfax, certain that he now sees things her way. While having tea, Mr. Fairfax tells Miss Lance he cannot comment on private family affairs. Miss Lance argues that the situation is inhumane, as a modest dowry would have secured Miss Pendleton a proper suitor. Clink. Mr. Fairfax concedes that her lack of a dowry is a disadvantage, but insists it's not the gravest issue. He continues, explaining that society judges her based on their own preconceived notions. Miss Lance passionately agrees, stating that as a Count's descendant, Miss Pendleton deserves a life of grace. She laments that one's origins can invite such ridicule, but Mr. Fairfax interrupts her, saying her name. He gently cautions Miss Lance that they are delving too far into Miss Pendleton's private life. She insists she meant no ill will, and he reassures her he only wanted them to avoid idle gossip. Mr. Fairfax expresses his firm belief that Miss Pendleton is more than capable of overcoming her own trials. Step. As she gets into her carriage, Miss Lance internally agrees she ought to be more careful with her words. She sits in the carriage, worrying how Mr. Fairfax will describe her in his letter to Mr. Dalton. A close-up on her eye reveals her contemplative mood regarding the correspondence. Back in his study, Mr. Fairfax remembers he must write to Whitefield Hall at Ian's request for news on Miss Pendleton. He sits at his desk, picking up a pen to begin his letter. Tap. He hesitates, deciding the news is too private for a letter, and resolves to simply mention a new acquaintance has arrived for Miss Pendleton. His butler interrupts, informing Master William that another letter has just arrived for him. Rip. He opens the new letter, musing aloud about what his worrisome sister-in-law is concerned about this time. Rush. A sudden panic strikes him as he yells for the butler to return the letter he was writing so he can start over. A flashback shows his dark-haired sister-in-law writing, her letter mentioning a bachelor haunting his hall. Mr. Fairfax berates himself for being a fool and not noticing something crucial. Scribble. He hastily rewrites his message. Wish. He shoves the new letter at his butler, ordering it be sent by the fastest courier possible. He urgently declares there is not a moment to waste. The scene shifts to a grand estate, identified as Whitefield Hall in Yorkshire. Inside, a dark-haired man in a vest stands reading the urgent letter. Clop. A carriage pulls up to the stately home. Creak. The dark-haired man, Sir Ian, arrives and asks the butler if the master of the house is present. The butler confirms the master is in his study, and Sir Ian instructs him to have his luggage brought to a guest room. Step. As the butler leads the way, he agrees to the request. The butler looks back, privately remarking on the extraordinary nature of the sudden visit. He thinks to himself that it is highly unusual for Mr. Dalton to make an unannounced visit. Dudun. As he walks, Ian Dalton wonders about the unscrupulous rogue he has been warned about. Mr. Fairfax looks up from his desk in wide-eyed shock. Ian Dalton has entered the room, catching Mr. Fairfax off guard and asking who he was calling unscrupulous. Mr. Fairfax stammers, asking what brings him in such haste, but Ian retorts that Fairfax left his estate with an incompetent steward. With a stern glare, Ian demands an answer for that alone. He then demands the name of the vulgarian from America, as a nervous Mr. Fairfax realizes his telegram spurred this immediate arrival. Slip. When asked why he needs the name, Ian pulls out a pistol, stating his intent to send the man back across the ocean for good. A shocked Mr. Fairfax exclaims that a duel is insane and that Ian Dalton has lost all sense. He argues that dueling is a barbaric practice from their grandfather's time. Clunk. Ian places the revolver on the table, coolly stating that no law explicitly forbids it. Mr. Fairfax shouts that it would be elder abuse, but Ian calmly asserts his right to request mutual combat. Ian states that if his challenge is rejected, the man must leave the country immediately. A sweating Mr. Fairfax begs him to stop making such wild threats. Ian changes his line of questioning, asking if Mr. Fairfax was also enamored by Miss Pendleton and if that's why he's there. A fond memory of a smiling Laura Pendleton appears. Ian reveals his original plan was to return home with Miss Pendleton as his lawfully wedded wife. Mr. Fairfax sighs in exasperation, thinking Ian is putting the wedding carriage before the horse. Freeze. Ian holds a cigar, pausing as he asks if she has confessed to returning his affections. Ian sardonically notes the complexity of the situation to Mr. Fairfax. He mockingly frames himself as a jilted suitor threatening his rival, asking if Mr. Fairfax objects. Mr. Fairfax calls his plan a tragedy that would only harm Miss Pendleton, but Ian refuses to stand by and do nothing. Ian internally justifies his actions, believing her own family would have done the same to defend her honor. Snap. He breaks his cigar in frustration, fuming that she must endure such advances without male relatives to protect her. His face is a mask of grim determination as he considers his course of action. You! A stunned Mr. Fairfax exhales, overwhelmed by Ian's passionate outburst. Slide. Mr. Fairfax shifts, agreeing with the sentiment but questioning Ian's right to act on her behalf. He stands and places a calming hand on Ian's arm, attempting to reason with him. Mr. Fairfax continues, asking what right he has to defend her honor by challenging a guest under her own roof. Warning that such a scandal would destroy their friendship for good, Mr. Fairfax's words give Ian pause. Tap. Mr. Fairfax pats his shoulder, urging him to let reason prevail while he seeks other solutions. A flustered Mr. Fairfax begs him to put away the ghastly revolver sitting on the table. Ian remains silent, his expression unreadable as he contemplates the warning. Click. As Ian puts the gun away, Mr. Fairfax inwardly marvels that he's never seen him so swayed by passion. Recalling Ian's fervor, Mr. Fairfax thinks of Miss Pendleton's saintly disposition in contrast. He puzzles over her rejection, admitting that while she deserves better, they had seemed happy together. Ian clarifies it wasn't a formal proposal, prompting a curious Mr. Fairfax to ask exactly how he conveyed his feelings. Mr. Fairfax is horrified to learn the details of the disastrous proposal, which Ian now deeply regrets. Aha! A sudden understanding dawns on Mr. Fairfax as he realizes why Miss Pendleton now avoids any mention of Ian. Mr. Fairfax advises repairing their friendship first, but Ian insists he must still deal with the old lecher. He vows to separate Mr. Price from Miss Pendleton, with or without a revolver. Mr. Fairfax turns to him with a serious expression, insisting he listen. He challenges Ian, asking if he has any idea how many other suitors Miss Pendleton has fended off over the years. He reveals that, compared to others, a widower like Mr. Price is practically an innocent. Clench. Ian tightens his fist as Mr. Fairfax expresses his complete faith in Miss Pendleton's ability to handle this herself. As Ian turns away, Mr. Fairfax warns that interfering now would only worsen the rift between him and Miss Pendleton. He delivers a final, dire warning. Raising a hand against Mr. Price will extinguish all hope of friendship, and he will never hear from her again. Ian bitterly acknowledges that any hope for friendship, let alone marriage, will be gone. Crackle. As the fire pops, Mr. Fairfax makes one last appeal for reason to prevail. Crackle. A quote about ruling one's passions appears as Ian struggles with his internal conflict. He stares at his discarded notes, wishing he could thrash the man and banish him from England. Slumped on the sofa, he fumes at his inability to defend her and punish those who gossip about her. Remembering Laura, he grudgingly admits that William is right and that violence would drive her away forever. He realizes that all he truly desires is to simply see her smile. Knock. A sudden knock at the door interrupts his melancholic thoughts. Click. A young blonde woman peeks in, asking if he has a moment, and he wearily agrees. She beams, announcing that Miss Lance is visiting, and was thrilled to hear he was back. A beautiful blonde woman, Miss Lance, is seen laughing elegantly while conversing with Mr. Fairfax. A confused Ian asks to be reminded who she is. Mr. Fairfax prompts him, asking if he truly doesn't recall Miss Dora Lance, but the name still draws a blank. The name sounds vaguely familiar, but Ian still can't place her. A memory surfaces of Miss Pendleton introducing him to a friend, and he finally realizes who she is. He recalls her excessive Cheshire cat grin, but concludes their brief meeting was hardly memorable. The woman at the door grows flustered, confessing she already told Miss Lance he would see her. Ian begins to dismiss the matter as none of his concern. But then, a new idea strikes him, and his expression shifts as he reconsiders. He recalls a memory of how pleased Miss Pendleton was whenever he was kind to her companions. Remembering her happy smile, a plan begins to form in his mind. In the drawing room, Miss Lance greets him with a brilliant smile, asking how long it has been. Mr. Dalton expresses regret for his abrupt departure as Miss Lance invites him to sit. Mr. Fairfax whispers that Miss Lance lured him out, but Mr. Dalton clarifies he's only trying to befriend Miss Pendleton's companion. Miss Lance graciously accepts his kind words. She asks about his trip to Whitefield and if his business there concluded successfully. Mr. Dalton smiles, beginning his reply. Inwardly, however, he finds her constant giggling tiresome and insincere. He forces a smile, privately wishing he could escape to the smoking room. Clink! A man's hand offers a cup of tea, declaring Mr. Dalton's return most opportune. Miss Lance excitedly discusses the upcoming boat race, but Mr. Fairfax reveals that Ian has no interest in sports. Asked about his hobbies, Mr. Dalton lists reading and writing, calling them uninteresting pursuits. A young girl named Janet chides Ian for his modesty, insisting his drawing skills are exceptional. Shake. Shake. Miss Lance marvels at his talent while a flustered Mr. Dalton claims Janet is merely flattering him. Impressed, Miss Lance asks if she might be allowed to admire his work. Mr. Fairfax seconds her request, and after a weary sigh, Mr. Dalton reluctantly agrees. Both Miss Lance and Janet lean in, their faces filled with awe as they look at his sketchbook. A lovely sketch of a countryside is shown as Mr. Fairfax expresses his admiration for Ian's art. Tap. As Miss Lance compliments Janet's eye for art, Mr. Dalton humbly thanks her. Glance. Miss Lance nervously considers making a bold proposal. Mr. Dalton sips his tea, watching her with a placid expression. She voices her thought that she would hardly be alone, implying a chaperone. Nod, nod. Janet smiles, seemingly in on the plan. Mr. Dalton politely refuses to draw an unwed lady out of respect for her reputation, a gesture Miss Lance finds deeply chivalrous. Problem-solved Miss Lance brightly suggests he can draw her and Janet together. Mr. Dalton hesitates, but Mr. Fairfax whispers that a lady's wish is paramount and no offense will be taken with Janet present. Groan. A defeated Mr. Dalton slumps in his chair. He resigns himself to the task, viewing it as a necessary path to gain Miss Pendleton's favor. His expression hardens with resolve. Clasp. He agrees to oblige. Plop. He is given a sketchbook and announces he will do one drawing for the ladies to keep. Miss Lance declares she will hang the finished portrait in the drawing room for all guests to admire. Mr. Dalton sits down and begins to sketch. Plop. The turning of a carriage wheel marks the end of their visit. Stare. Miss Lance gazes fondly at the finished portrait, calling it delicate and winsome. She muses that his artistic sensibility is a treasure far greater than any man's property. She stares into the distance, lost in thought. She recalls the intense feeling of his gaze, piercing her soul as he drew. Sha-la-la. A cartoonish Miss Lance floats happily, clutching the portrait to her heart. The finished sketch of Miss Lance and Janet hangs in a golden frame over a mantelpiece. A closer view of the portrait suggests she is nurturing a wishful misconception. The scene shifts to Grosvenor Street in Mayfair the following morning. Sunlight illuminates the grand architecture of the London neighborhood. A maid named Anne pauses by a window, lost in a sudden thought while discussing laundry. Rush. Anne abruptly announces she has an errand and runs out, leaving her colleagues startled and confused. She smiles as she greets a gentleman arriving outside. The visitor is revealed to be Mr. Dalton, dressed in a formal dark coat and top hat. From inside the house, Miss Pendleton calls out for Anne. She stands at the top of the stairs, looking down with a worried expression. Outside, Mr. Dalton asks Anne about Miss Pendleton's well-being, and Anne assures him she's healthy. However, Anne adds that something else is troubling her mistress. She mentions that the problem is a, quote, man of property from the States. When Anne asks if he is familiar with a Mr. Price, Mr. Dalton replies that he has never heard the name before. Anne refuses to tell Mr. Dalton Mr. Price's whereabouts, and he asks why. She astutely points out the murderous look on his face, predicting he intends to shoot his rival. She argues that Miss Laura needs a husband, and a murderer would make a poor suitor. Mr. Dalton listens intently to her reasoning. Impressed by her loyalty, he asks her name, and she introduces herself as Anne Steele before he asks if she'll aid his courtship. Twirl. He suavely rolls a cigar, asking Steele to enlighten him on the matter. He asks about his chances with Miss Pendleton, and Anne thoughtfully replies that not all hope is lost. He asks if she also believes a duel against Price would be a mistake. Anne confirms it would only lead to Miss Pendleton severing all ties with him, showing a grim vision of his potential death and its consequences for Laura. She warns that Laura would either be beaten to death by her uncle or be banished to a colony as a spinster. But grit, Mr. Dalton insists he can prevent this fate by marrying her himself. Anne questions his view of her mistress, but he clarifies he is concerned about her becoming destitute. Squeeze. He grips his cane, worrying what would happen if her aunt dies, but Anne reveals surprising news. Stagger. Anne explains that Miss Laura has been preparing to become a governess, a revelation that shocks Mr. Dalton so much he almost drops his cane. Done. As he struggles to process the news, Anne realizes he was completely unaware of Laura's private plans. In a flashback, a noblewoman is told that no respectable household would hire her, as fallen ladies are known for their haughtiness. Anne boasts of Miss Laura's classical education and fluency in 5 languages, assuring him she will be highly sought after. A vision shows Laura as a governess, patiently teaching a young boy. A gloved hand reaches for another, symbolizing an offer of help or a plea. A man kneels before a woman, urging her to claim her own freedom. Mr. Dalton stands with a hardened, resolute expression. The scene shifts to the exterior of a stately residence. Step. As he prepares to leave, Mr. Dalton asks Anne to keep his visit a secret. Anne agrees and asks if he has a plan as they walk away together. Returning inside, Anne lies to Miss Pendleton, claiming she was out looking for a candle holder. Step. As they walk, Miss Pendleton discusses household repairs. Unaware of Anne's recent meeting, Anne is inwardly relieved she wasn't caught, musing on how peculiar Mr. Dalton is. She reflects that beneath his gentlemanly exterior lies the intensity of a man possessed. Anne believes that his world revolves entirely around Miss Laura. A sly smile crosses Anne's face as she concludes his determined gaze means he won't give up. She pictures a happy future where he whisks Miss Laura away to a cherished new life at Whitefield. From the framed portrait at the Lance residence, rumors of Ian Dalton's return spread throughout London. Society gossips that a gentleman gifting a hand-drawn portrait to a lady is quite scandalous. However, Janet Fairfax's presence in the sketch deflected speculation, making it seem like a simple commission from a friend. At a tea party, ladies excitedly discuss how Mr. Dalton agreed wholeheartedly with Miss Lance, staring at her intently. A flashback reveals Mr. Dalton's polite agreement was merely an attempt to endure the conversation, chatter. The ladies misinterpret his courtesy as a clear declaration of love for Dora. Chatter. They gossip excitedly, certain of his affections. Smirk. One woman suggests a formal proposal might even be imminent. Miss Lance sits in stunned silence, absorbing their speculation. She touches her hair, pondering that Mr. Dalton's urgent return to London must have a purpose. She concludes his purpose must be marriage with her. Poof. Hey. Her friends giggle around a blushing Miss Lance, already offering to be her bridesmaids. While she feigns caution, her friend insists his intentions have been shown in every way but words. Her friends eagerly demand she promise to have the wedding at Whitefield Estate, so they can finally visit. They wonder what the renowned but unseen Whitefield Hall looks like, speculating its privacy is a family tradition. Clap! One woman gasps, claiming to know someone who saw the hall in a painting, shocking Miss Lance. Miss Lance eagerly asks where one might see such a painting. Miss Pendleton is seen in profile, looking thoughtful and serene in a sunlit room. A woman in a white gown stands alone in a sunlit hall. The scene flashes back to a tea party hosted by the Pendletons. A guest recounts how a friend spotted a new landscape painting and asked Miss Pendleton about it. A light brown-haired woman listens to the story with focused intensity. The speaker reveals the painting was a depiction of the famed Whitefield Hall. Ladies chatter, wondering how the painting came to be there and speculating Mr. Dalton gifted it. A memory shows the tall, dark-haired Mr. Dalton standing beside a smaller Miss Pendleton. A woman asks Miss Dora Lance about Mr. Dalton, while another suggests Miss Pendleton must have prized the rare artwork. A flustered Miss Lance clarifies she was only observing the painting, not appraising its value. Miss Lance internally envies Miss Pendleton's familiarity with Mr. Dalton and his estate. Her friends dismiss her concerns, declaring she will soon be the lady of Whitefield Hall, and mentioning a portrait Mr. Dalton drew of her. Encouraged by their words, Miss Lance offers a faint, hopeful smile. Buoyed by wishful thinking, Miss Lance's grasp on reality begins to loosen. Time passes, bringing the arrival of Lord Gerald Pendleton and his party to the townhouse. Clop. A grand carriage pulls up to the Pendleton townhouse. Clack. From inside the carriage, Miss Pendleton is seen waiting with her staff. As a blond man steps out, Miss Pendleton watches his approach. The man identifies himself in his thoughts as Charles Pendleton, her unacquainted cousin. Miss Pendleton nervously notes his striking resemblance to a young Uncle Gerald. Clench. She grips her hands as Charles holds the carriage door open. Clasp. A woman is helped out, eagerly exclaiming her arrival at the famous townhouse. The woman, identified as Miss Joanne Jensen, admires the tasteful decor. The narrator describes Miss Jensen as a confident American heiress as she approaches. Ba-bump. Miss Pendleton's eyes widen with a jolt of apprehension. Ba-bump. The final guest arrives, an older man she recognizes as her uncle. Ba-bump. Her heart pounds as she stands rigidly before her guests. She resolves that neither of them are the people they once were. Miss Pendleton formally welcomes her cousin, her uncle, and Miss Jensen. Bow. She greets them on behalf of the lady of the house, Countess Abigail Pendleton. With a gracious smile, she promises to see to their every need. Her cousin and uncle stare back at her with stern, unreadable expressions. Clack. The red-haired woman steps forward, introducing herself as Joanne Jensen. Miss Jensen confidently offers her hand to Miss Pendleton. She smiles warmly, declaring it a pleasure to make her acquaintance. Jolt. A startled Miss Pendleton accepts the handshake, surprised by such a bold introduction. Miss Pendleton introduces herself as Laura, and Miss Jensen thanks her for the welcome. Glance. Miss Jensen comments that the Pendleton men claim this is London's finest townhouse. Laura offers to give them a tour to see for themselves. She tactfully adds that its fineness is a matter of personal judgment. Smirk. Miss Jensen responds with a sly, knowing look. Ahaha. Miss Jensen laughs, admiring Laura's candor and suggesting they head inside for tea. She then eagerly requests a tour of the drawing room, flustering Charles. Charles reminds her they have an appointment with Mr. Price, but she dismisses his urgency. When he suggests she rest, she retorts that he was the one who was seasick. Gasp! She chides Charles for acting like an errand boy, causing him to panic. Grab. Charles seizes her arm, declaring his right as her escort to decide their plans. He insists an engaged woman in Britain should obey her future husband, but she scoffs. Miss Jensen asks a nervous Laura if this is true, who replies it's not necessarily so. Lord Gerald intervenes, suggesting they reschedule to avoid tiring Miss Jensen and delaying their meeting. Miss Jensen considers his words and agrees to defer to his judgment. Laura notes, the Pendleton men seem more flustered than insulted by Miss Jensen's boldness. A voice promises to join them for dinner with their godfather that evening. Miss Jensen blows a kiss to Miss Pendleton, promising to see her then. Plop, plop. Laura stands before the townhouse as her relatives approach. Freeze. Her uncle's cold demand to know if the rooms are ready makes her tense up. With a grimace, Lord Gerald turns and glares into the distance. Laura forces a smile, confirming she has prepared 2 rooms on the 2nd floor. Stride. As her uncle walks past, she tries to inform him about the staff. Stride. Her cousin Charles offers a smug scoff as he follows his father inside. Squeeze. Laura clenches her fist, telling herself to let go of past grudges. She composes herself, resolving to host a flawless dinner. Laura asks a butler, Leon, if escorting her relatives went smoothly, and he hesitates. He informs her that the 2 men went directly upstairs to see Lady Abigail. A worried Laura wonders why they would go to her so soon. Rush. Step. Hearing the news, Laura hurries up the stairs herself. Huff. She pauses at the top of the stairs, catching her breath in a panic. A flashback shows 2 figures arguing, recalling decades of quarreling between them. By bump. Before a closed door, she worries their reunion will worsen her grandmother's condition. Ba-bump! Determined to prevent a fight, she nervously asks permission to enter. Clack. As her heart pounds, she turns the handle, ready to keep the peace. She opens the door to find her uncle kneeling, tearfully begging his mother for forgiveness. Her grandmother, Lady Abigail, smiles gently and tells her son Gerald it's all right. Clasp. She takes his gloved hand, reassuring him that all is well. Overcome with emotion, Lord Gerald cries out for his mother. Stunned, Laura watches from the doorway as Lady Abigail summons her grandson, Charles. Crouch. Charles kneels, asking his grandmother if she remembers giving him his name. Lady Abigail warmly greets her grandson, admiring the man he's become as Laura looks on. She feels like an outsider, witnessing an impossibly heartwarming family reunion. The 3 generations of Pendletons share a tender moment together. Lady Abigail notices Laura and tells her not to just stand there. She prompts Gerald to greet his niece, praising Laura's excellent care in his absence. Turning to Laura, Lord Gerald curtly agrees to greet her. Pat. He condescendingly pats her arm, calling her actions commendable. Laura smiles graciously, replying that it was the least she could do. Lady Abigail watches the exchange with a gentle smile. Throb. For her, this family moment is the only thing of importance. Later, the scene shifts to a lavishly prepared dinner table. 2 glasses of champagne are raised for a toast. At dinner, Lord Gerald and Lady Abigail share a happy moment. Elsewhere at the table, Charles converses with Miss Jensen and a familiar-looking man. The narrator explains that Charles spoke of his past career in a legal practice. He then passionately described his newfound path as a clergyman, guided by faith. His declaration that faith and love can overcome anything earns nods of approval. Laura quietly observes the gathering from her seat. Whistle. Later, Charles walks past Laura and a maid with a confident air. Laura looks down, a sheen of sweat on her face, revealing her unease. A maid asks if there is anything else she can assist with. Laura begins giving instructions for a grocery delivery the next morning. Step. She is startled as a voice suddenly apologizes for the intrusion. Mr. Price appears, explaining he returned because he misplaced his gloves. Laura internally scoffs at the excuse, certain he left the gloves intentionally. Pass. An uneasy Laura hands the gloves to Mr. Price as her staff watches. Mr. Price accepts the gloves from Laura in the drawing room. He then asks her to mentor his goddaughter Joanne in London society. He explains Joanne was a social queen in New York and now aims to conquer London. Mr. Price continues, calling Joanne a novice in British etiquette, who needs a fine lady like Laura to guide her. Since Miss Jensen is engaged to her cousin, Laura agrees to lend her utmost aid. Chuckle, thanking her, Mr. Price steps closer with one last request, startling Laura. Wish. He suddenly grabs her hands, begging her to stop refusing him, while the staff seethes in the background. Shout! Laura angrily declares that her answer to his marriage proposals will never change. Mr. Price falls silent, looking stunned by her forceful rejection. Sigh. He speaks of riddles and ciphers, asking for mercy for his shortcomings, which leaves Laura confused. Before departing with a bow, Mr. Price reminds her that he is still ardently awaiting her answer. Laura stands alone, unsettled by the encounter. Feeling drained, she heads upstairs, deciding to retire for the night. Loom! A voice suddenly compliments her hostess skills, causing her to look up in alarm. Her uncle, Lord Gerald Pendleton, stands ominously at the top of the stairs. Lord Gerald offers his compliments to Laura, who looks up at him nervously. He descends the stairs, acknowledging that she has been running the house for years, and she confirms she did her best. He pointedly observes her lack of success in marriage, and she blames unkind fortune. Scoff. He mockingly questions if her criteria are to blame, and she tearfully denies being so presumptuous. Tap. He passes her on the stairs, warning her not to feel entitled to anything from his mother, or a place in his house. As he departs, he warns her to find her own way to live soon. Laura is left alone on the staircase, watching him go. She bitterly realizes she was a fool to hope he had changed. Squeeze. She grips the banister, her knuckles white. In his eyes, she knows she is still just an unwelcome mouse living off his generosity. A sad, knowing smile touches her lips. She resolves that once she is free of him, she will gladly cede his greatest pride and joy. Later, an unannounced visitor arrives at the Pendleton townhouse. The visitor, Miss Jensen, declares herself captivated by the residence. She praises the home's tasteful decor, and Laura graciously accepts the compliment. Miss Jensen strikes a confident pose as she observes the room. Laura reflects on Miss Jensen's bold nature while watching her guest. Laura gives the eager Miss Jensen a tour of the house. The scene transitions to show a sprawling, grand estate. Miss Jensen smiles, her attention on her ornate necklace. Step. As they walk, Miss Jensen peppers Laura with questions, and Laura agrees to explain everything. The two women settle down for tea in the drawing room. Laura maintains a pleasant smile during their conversation. Laura inquires about her guest's social interests, and Miss Jensen confirms her godfather has been talking. Miss Jensen states her plan to enter London society after marrying Charles, prompting Laura to comment on the distance from the clergy house. Miss Jensen surprisingly reveals they will forego the clergy house, confusing Laura, who thought Charles was joining the church. A knowing smile plays on Miss Jensen's lips as she sips her tea. Chuckle. She admits the townhouse itself was a wonderful wedding gift that influenced her acceptance of the marriage proposal. Laura finds Miss Jensen's admission about the house and the clergy house puzzling. Musing on her guest's candor, Laura wonders if Miss Jensen is simply oblivious or knows something she doesn't. Clink. A dark silhouette appears as Miss Jensen remembers something she wanted to ask. Miss Jensen requests a recommendation for a good dressmaker, prompting Laura to ask why she didn't bring her wardrobe. Recalling her journey, Miss Jensen explains that she tried, but something happened to her 3 chests of fine dresses. Miss Jensen explains that, unfortunately, 2 of her 3 dress trunks were lost during the voyage. Seeing an opportunity in misfortune, Miss Jensen plans to create a new London wardrobe, but Laura warns it may be challenging. Laura explains that during the social season, every boutique is swamped with orders, causing Miss Jensen to worry. Ah! Miss Jensen panics at the thought of having no clothes and no seamstress. Laura soothes her, suggesting a shop with trendy, ready-made clothes and assuring her that their staff can handle any adjustments. Laura then offers to accompany her personally, prompting Miss Jensen to call her an awfully kind soul. Clasp. Miss Jensen takes Laura's hand, declaring her the perfect woman to help her achieve her aims in London. She begins to explain her motivations as a New York socialite. Miss Jensen candidly tells Laura that for her, marrying into the British nobility is a priceless opportunity. She strikes a confident pose in a memory of a fine maroon gown. She states that becoming Lady Joanne Pendleton, an earl's wife, is an ambition well within her reach. With a confident smile, she declares that establishing herself in London will open the doors to the entire continent. Miss Jensen vows to conquer Europe, leaving Laura to realize with shock that the marriage is merely a stepping stone for her. Laura reflects on Miss Jensen's unapologetic, modern ambition, contrasting it with her cousin's more subtle conceit. The two women sit facing each other, a silent understanding passing between them. Laura offers her assistance in helping Miss Jensen achieve her goals. Haha. Miss Jensen bluntly asks if her American ways offend Laura's English sensibilities, and Laura frankly agrees. Deciding she needs a tutor, Miss Jensen promises to follow Laura's instructions, and a flattered Laura agrees to do her utmost to help. Bustle. A week later, the scene shifts to a sunny day at a boat race. Guests in fine attire mingle near a tent by the water. Chatter. Ladies in the crowd spy the unfamiliar woman with Miss Pendleton, speculating she is the rumored visitor. Chatter. They confirm it must be her. with one woman recalling seeing the pair shopping in Knightsbridge. Laura and Miss Jensen stand together arm in arm, both dressed in elegant white gowns and hats. A group of women greets Laura warmly, eagerly asking for an introduction to her new acquaintance. Raise. Laura smiles and begins to introduce her companion to the ladies. Murmur. Her introduction is cut short as her eyes land on a familiar figure in the distance. Pause. She falls silent, her expression frozen in surprise. Chatter. The crowd parts slightly, revealing the man who has captured her attention. Her eye widens in disbelief. The man is revealed to be handsome, with dark, styled hair and a serious profile. A gentle breeze blows as the two stand apart, a sudden tension in the air. A stunned Laura recognizes the man as Mr. Dalton. Mr. Dalton turns his head as Laura wonders what he could possibly be doing in London. Miss Jensen notices her friend's distraction and asks if she is all right. She gently points out that Laura has dropped her parasol. Snapping back to reality, Laura sees her parasol on the grass and quickly regains her composure, apologizing for her lapse in manners. She turns back to the group and formally introduces Miss Joanne Jensen, her cousin's fiancée. Lift. Joanne greets the ladies with a charming curtsy, and they welcome her warmly to England. The ladies express how they've been dying to meet the visitor from the States, and Miss Jensen hopes not to disappoint them. A smiling Miss Jensen graciously thanks them for their hospitality. As one of the ladies asks about her trip, Laura watches the pleasant exchange, thinking to herself that things are going well so far. A flashback shows Laura instructing Miss Jensen on proper etiquette, with Miss Jensen being praised for her quick learning. Chatter. In the present, Miss Jensen skillfully navigates the social circle, even including her godfather, Mr. Price, in the conversation. Laura observes with satisfaction, confident that Miss Jensen has already won over a sought-after social circle and will easily secure her place in society. However, her attention shifts, and a bead of sweat appears on her face as she looks back towards the crowd. She confirms to herself that her eyes weren't playing tricks. Mr. Dalton's proud gait is unmistakable. As she wonders why he's back in London, a blonde woman in a pink-trimmed hat spots him with a gasp. Rush. The woman calls out to Mr. Dalton, much to Laura's alarm. The blonde woman, Miss Lance, now stands beside Mr. Dalton. One of the ladies asks if the handsome gentleman is Miss Lance's suitor, but another clarifies that Mr. Dalton is merely an acquaintance to them all. Giggle. The ladies gossip that Mr. Dalton may soon become more than a friend to Miss Lance. One of the women asks another how long it's been since Mr. Dalton returned to London, who estimates over a fortnight. Laura listens as a woman mentions how charming it was that Mr. Dalton gifted Miss Lance a drawing on his first day back. Laura reflects on the word charming, sensing an intangible shift in the air between Mr. Dalton and Miss Lance. The scene focuses on Miss Lance and Mr. Dalton, who smiles warmly as they converse. As she watches, Laura muses that the warmth between them doesn't seem quite like romance. Squeeze. But is familiar enough to make her wonder, and she unconsciously tightens her fist. Step. Looking distressed, Laura decides to step away from the group. A voice, Mr. Dalton's, suddenly laments how long their paths have been separated. Startled, Laura looks up to find him standing before her. Mr. Dalton gazes at her with a calm, unreadable expression. Regaining her composure, Laura smiles and prepares to make an introduction. Twitch. Laura introduces Miss Jensen as her cousin's fiancée and Mr. Price's goddaughter, causing Mr. Dalton's eye to twitch. Miss Jensen greets Mr. Dalton, who graciously asks to join their party, saying he had hoped to find her. Laura reflects that while she assumed they'd meet again, this encounter is far more sudden than she expected. She tells herself not to speculate, as Mr. Dalton appears to have little interest in her now. Later, Laura and Mr. Dalton sit near each other, but remain distant, not speaking. Gasp! She thinks that this is for the best, as she worried his affections might still linger. She wonders, however, if she completely misread his intentions during their last meeting. Blush. In a flashback, she realizes he may not have been entirely forthcoming with his feelings, and that he might have wanted to resolve their confusion, which causes her to blush. Miss Jensen notices her flushed face and asks if she is all right, but Laura dismisses her concern. As Laura blames the vapors for her blush, she hears Miss Lance and Mr. Dalton laughing together nearby. She watches them with a quiet, pensive expression. Rise. Laura excuses herself to get a drink, needing a moment alone. As she leaves, another woman offers to help, but Laura politely insists she can manage while Mr. Dalton watches her go. Carrying a glass, she walks away, Unable to shake the heaviness in her chest, she reminds herself that by rejecting him, she forfeited any right to pine for his affection. She tries to convince herself she was only caught off guard by his sudden appearance, now that he seems to have moved on and cleared his heart of ambiguity. She resolves that it's wiser to no longer debase herself with self-pitying fondness. She decides to banish any lingering sentiment before it can cause trouble. She turns to walk back, only to find Mr. Dalton now walking beside her. Stunned, she quietly says his name as they lock eyes. He thinks to himself that she appears to have grown gaunt, confirming a suspicion he'd held. Laura looks at him, appearing nervous and vulnerable under his gaze. Clench. He internally struggles with his yearning, knowing etiquette demands he remain measured as he clenches his fist. Wish! He surprises her by revealing something he found, believing she dropped it on her way over. Swish. He presents 2 delicate pink fabric flowers, assuring her they haven't been damaged. Squeeze. Blushing, Laura gently clutches her dress, touched by his kind gesture. Mr. Dalton asks if she will grant him a moment of her time. He looks at her earnestly, explaining that he has a favor of the utmost importance to ask. They stand opposite each other, a quiet tension filling the space between them. Laura decides it would be rude to refuse his request for a stroll. Step. As they begin to walk, she wonders what favor he could possibly want after what feels like an eternity apart. He asks how she has been since they last spoke, and she politely returns the inquiry. Smile. He smiles, pleased that they can meet again in good health. His inner thoughts betray his calm exterior as he thinks of her as Miss Laura Pendleton of Mayfair, for whom every moment apart feels like an eternity. He reflects on his tormented days of longing, finding it almost inconceivable that they are now walking side by side. From the first moment they met, he admits it has been a futile struggle to keep his eyes from finding their way back to her. Clench. He resolves to be stoic, clenching his fist again, fearing that any eager approach might cause her to recoil from him once more. Laura casually asks Mr. Dalton if his time in Whitefield was as pleasant as he once described. He explains his trip was for business, and an impulse brought him back, as Whitefield has lost its homely allure for him. Surprised, Laura asks why, reminding him how fondly he used to speak of the estate. He smiles, clarifying that his fondness is now tainted by the unbearable stillness of solitude. A stark silhouette of Whitefield Hall stands alone. He reveals that her words made him ponder his solitary life for his entire stay. A faded image of a couple walking together illustrates the companionship he now desires. Halt. They stop walking, as he says that even a misanthrope couldn't refute her reasoning. He admits that, as a former cynic, their past conversations led him to a realization. He turns to her, confessing he now understands the misery of a life spent alone and yearns for a lady's company at his estate. He clarifies that he's speaking of a wife and can think of no better ally than Miss Pendleton to aid his cause, leaving her stunned. He acknowledges his reputation as an eccentric and asks for her assistance, believing she could be a great benefit to him. Laura internally questions his sincerity, wondering if he's deceiving himself or if she's being naive. A vision of them sitting apart underscores her uncertainty. She decides that if he's being insincere, she must match his act with nonchalance. Squeeze. With a determined clench of her fist, she resolves to play along. Taking his arm again with a polite smile, she tells him that she is the one who owes him greatly. She claims she's simply fulfilling her agreement with Mr. Fairfax, and asks if he truly believes marrying within the year is feasible. Laura assures him he'll have no trouble attracting a lady, and suggests he attend the upcoming ball hosted by Miss Lance's family. Glance. When she asks if he has a certain lady in mind, he slyly glances away, admitting he does but lacks the courage to approach her. Wondering if he means Miss Lance, Laura suggests a ball is the perfect opportunity to ask for a dance and quizzes him on his waltz steps. He admits his dancing is still poor, and she playfully insists that if he's serious about love, he must also be serious about dancing. He looks at her intently, asking why she believes a shared dance can spark love. She explains that it is the joy of sharing fleeting moments, moving in perfect unison. Her explanation continues, describing how 2 partners become lost to everything but the music. A close-up shows their feet moving together in a waltz. A romantic image of them dancing together illustrates her point. She finishes by saying a dance is the most fitting metaphor for the sacred union of matrimony, to which he declares she has much more to teach him than just the waltz, and that he could never tire of her tutelage, causing her eye to twitch. He tells himself his words are merely friendly endearment, warning his heart not to mistake them for anything else. Step. As they walk back, Laura convinces herself that he's only showing the courtesies of a good friend. Brush. As he brushes his arm, she begins to offer a friendly gesture, She promises to save a space for him at the very top of her dance card. With a bright smile, she insists she'd do anything for such a kind friend. Mr. Dalton agrees that she too has been exceedingly kind. Clasp. He gently takes her hand in his. He bows his head and presses a formal kiss to her gloved hand. Laura envisions Mr. Dalton sitting beside Miss Lance, looking like a winsome couple. She imagines his future with another woman as a happily married gentleman. With a contented smile, she thinks she would be delighted to see his efforts succeed. The scene shifts to a quiet bedroom, where Laura sits at the bedside of her ailing grandmother. Wheeze. She listens to her grandmother's labored breathing, worried that she hasn't been sleeping well. A memory surfaces of her Uncle Gerald firmly instructing her to leave her grandmother's care to him and focus on Miss Jensen. Her grandmother awakens and asks how long she has been there, and Laura gently confirms she has been there for a while. The grandmother asks about the boat race, and Laura recounts the day's pleasant events. While Laura is speaking, her grandmother's tone shifts as she suddenly asks, "Laura, has it been hard for you?" A solemn silence falls as Laura sits beside the bed. Her grandmother repeats the question with gentle concern, catching Laura off guard. A single bead of sweat rolls down Laura's face as she pretends not to understand. Squeeze. She nervously asks what could possibly be troubling her as she clenches the bedsheets in her hand. Her grandmother observes that Laura has always hidden her fragility behind a smile. She continues, noting that an ironclad heart conceals the tenderness within. Laura confirms this is precisely what she intends. Her grandmother's peaceful acceptance of her approaching death stuns Laura. As Laura begs her to hold on, her grandmother only wishes her joy. Drip. A tear falls as Laura refuses to accept her grandmother's words. Laura finally weeps as her grandmother watches with a sad, gentle smile. A warm memory surfaces of her grandmother embracing her as a child. Her grandmother remarks that even her tears are zealously guarded. Blink. Promising Laura will soon be free, she vows to make amends for the past. Laura stands alone in the quiet hallway, lost in sorrowful thought. She internally despairs over the guilt in her grandmother's voice. Clack. She finds her uncle, who immediately questions her about her outing with Miss Jensen. She calmly assures him that he has no cause for concern. Pleased, he asks if Miss Jensen was satisfied with the day. His demeanor hardens as he pivots to the subject of Mr. Price's proposal. With quiet resignation, she confirms that she was indeed proposed to. Laura firmly states she has no desire to marry the gentleman. He viciously insults her, declaring she's in no position to refuse. She meets his gaze steadily, telling him he should know better. Tisk. He scoffs as she explains a lady's right to refuse, ordering her not to lecture him. Step. He walks to the door, offering a piece of advice as her kin. He coldly tells her that such considerations are a luxury she cannot afford. He pressures her to stop hesitating and simply accept the proposal. Tremble. Alone, she questions if her own will holds any meaning. Clench. She reaffirms her conviction to never betray her principles for any marriage. Mr. Dalton stands with his back turned, a crushed flower hidden in his gloved hand. A few days later, the scene shifts to Mrs. Nisley's townhouse for a ball. A haggard Miss Jensen peeks out from a doorway to greet a concerned Laura. Laura notes that Miss Jensen appears far more anxious than usual. Flop. Miss Jensen admits her anxiety is justified as she drops her luggage. Sigh. Lying dramatically on a sofa, she worries about becoming a laughingstock. A bead of sweat appears on Laura's face as she listens with concern. A narrative caption reveals there was a reason for Miss Jensen's distress. The story flashes back to the previous day when Miss Jensen invited Laura for help. Miss Jensen panics, realizing her modest American dresses are considered gaudy in London. Overwhelmed by her decadent wardrobe, she wonders what she can possibly wear. She lies back in despair, lamenting not having bought a dress locally. Step. An unfamiliar voice calls out to Miss Pendleton, interrupting the moment. Droop. A blonde woman introduces herself as Auntie Nisley, greeting Laura warmly. Mrs. Nisley fusses over her humble welcome, but Laura politely demurs. Laura smiles, downplaying Miss Jensen's international wardrobe emergency. Clack. Recalling an idea she had, Laura opens a wicker case. She reveals her solution with a bright, confident smile. Mrs. Nisley and Laura are both visibly impressed by the result. Miss Jensen is revealed in a beautifully and elegantly altered yellow gown. Amazed, Miss Jensen asks how she did it, and Laura explains the simple alterations. Ah! A thrilled Miss Jensen laughs, thanking Laura profusely for saving her evening. When invited to stay, Laura politely declines, hoping to avoid Mr. Price. After some gentle insistence, Laura nervously agrees to stay. Laura realizes she is in a predicament of her own making. Chatter. Amidst the feast, she is offered another glass of wine. She reflects that their modest dinner has become quite the feast. Miss Jensen smiles, enjoying the agreeable change of being the guest. Despite her initial reservations, Laura finds the evening surprisingly merry. The three women enjoy a peaceful afternoon of music and tea. She laughs, genuinely delighted by the pleasant company. The mood shifts as Laura sits opposite the older blonde woman. Startled by a comment, she asks for clarification. The woman, Mrs. Nisley, notes she's heard of her brother's attempts to woo Laura and that Laura seems agreeable to it. Wish! Miss Jensen jumps up, begging her auntie to stop the conversation. As Miss Jensen scolds her for unsettling Laura, the aunt defends her meddling as a necessary nudge. Chuckle. The aunt asks why they should delay when the marriage is already decided, shocking Laura, who tries to correct her. Laura firmly states that her refusal of the proposal was beyond question. Silence falls as the two women stare, taken aback by her firm declaration. Mrs. Nisley dismisses it as bashfulness and welcomes her to the family, turning to ask for Miss Jensen's agreement. Miss Jensen agrees, saying Uncle Thomas is blessed to have found such a lovely bride. Laura internally questions how both women became so convinced she would agree to marry Mr. Price. Clench. She decides this misunderstanding is wrong and must not be allowed to stand. Laura politely addresses Mrs. Nisley and Miss Jensen, preparing to clarify the situation. She stresses that she has no intention of marrying Mr. Price and has been confused by the matter since day one. As the situation grows tense, Miss Jensen advises her to calm down. Laura explains that this is precisely the sort of marriage she has sought to avoid all her life. She declares that another mention of the proposal will be taken as a personal slight, stunning the other two. Sigh. Spring. Announcing her departure, Laura stands to leave as Miss Jensen calls after her. Clasp. Miss Jensen grabs her arm, offering a carriage ride, but Laura insists she can manage on her own. Miss Jensen reveals she wanted a private word and asks for a moment to get her coat. Clop. Their carriage travels along a city street at sunset. Clop. Inside the carriage, Miss Jensen tells Laura this will be the last time she asks. Nod. Ask directly. Laura confirms without a doubt that she harbors no fondness for Mr. Price, distressing Miss Jensen. Exasperated, Miss Jensen wonders what these old fogies have done, apologizing for how they must seem. She reveals that her Uncle Thomas plans to make a public proposal at tomorrow night's ball. Jolt. Laura is stunned by the news, insisting it cannot be true. Clop. Miss Jensen admits she should have realized from the start that the marriage was a nuisance to Laura. Plop. However, she explains that the debacle was not entirely her godfather's creation. She reveals she knew of Miss Pendleton long before ever crossing the pond. Miss Jensen explains that Laura's uncle visited the States half a year ago and conferred with Mr. Price about an investment. While there, her uncle spoke of his marriage troubles before suddenly becoming preoccupied with arranging a match. Though skeptical, Miss Jensen was assured by Mr. Price that Laura herself had sent a favorable reply to her uncle. Shake. When asked if she ever wrote such a letter, Laura shakes her head no. Clop. Laura wonders why Uncle Gerald would orchestrate such a ruse, and Miss Jensen reminds her of his son's shipbuilding business. Mr. Pendleton sought an investment from Mr. Price, who initially refused due to the poor business plan. Now that he has agreed to invest, Miss Jensen asks what Laura thinks he was promised in return. Creak. As their carriage arrives, Miss Jensen advises Laura to take up the matter with the gentleman himself. Stepping from the carriage, Miss Jensen states the painful certainty. Her uncle traded her hand in marriage for an investment. Laura stands in stunned silence, absorbing the weight of her uncle's betrayal. She thanks Miss Jensen for the warning, and Miss Jensen resolves to speak with her godfather. Miss Jensen urges her to still attend the ball and give her godfather a chance to apologize. Dep. Laura walks into her now quiet home. With her hand on the banister, she realizes all the confusing pieces are finally starting to fit together. A memory recalls Mr. Price's proposal to take her as his wife. She realizes a plot was unfolding unbeknownst to her. Step. Clack. She approaches a door, knowing there was more to the story. Creak. The door swings open into darkness. Her resolute gaze cuts through the shadows. She confronts the specter of her life. Her uncle. He coldly asks if she was never taught to knock. He puts out his cigar and insists on speaking first. He commands her to publicly accept Mr. Price's proposal at the ball.